All right. Good evening, everyone. This is John Tapp with the Saint Mack and Saint transmission. Uh, I want to wish you all the happy Thanksgiving tomorrow, and try to take care of yourselves, but be careful going to visit your families. But we're gonna start with the hot springs. Oh, wait a minute. Um, yeah, we're gonna start with Hot Springs, Arkansas. That will be for. Wait a minute. So, but you know what? We're gonna start with Arkansas. So we're gonna start with packaged food, which is 300 miles. And I hope you guys enjoy your life, your vacation there, like I do. And let's start this truck and get going.
Okay, here we go. Get ready to turn left. Turn left.
This programming is sponsored by City Lights, downtown Houston's display of holiday lights and ice skating, sweet treats, and event vendors. Visitors experience the holiday season through 12 different villages spanning downtown. Details and hotel information at visithouston.com.
Final decisions in early 2026. I'm Katherine Hobbs in Dallas.
I'm Gail DeLauder from the Texas Newsroom.
You're listening to statewide news from public radio stations across Texas. This coverage is only possible because of support from listeners like you. You can help sustain and grow Texas news coverage by donating to your local public radio station today.
You can't tackle life's big challenges if you let the little ones get you down. That's why Houston Matters sweats the small stuff once a month as we seek out your Houstonian pet peeves. Email them to talk@houstonmatters.org. Then join us for the next Houston Matters.
That'll be Monday morning at 9 here on your NPR station, News 88.7. Heading in on the Gulf northbound 45, it'll be about a 15 to 20-minute delay to make it from Monroe to Telephone. Still have that wreck at Woodridge and the two left lanes. It's 5:35.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from your part-time controller, the nonprofit accounting specialists, providing financial management services to support stronger nonprofits who make the world a better place. Learn more at yptc.com/NPR. And from Fisher Investments, Fisher's dedicated team of specialists provide resources on investing, retirement income, estate planning, and more. Learn more at FisherInvestments.com.
Go straight on.
Investing in securities involves the risk of loss. This is NPR.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. Millions of Americans are on the move today. It's expected to be the busiest Thanksgiving holiday ever for air travel, putting the U.S. aviation system to the test.
So far, so good. Actually, the airport wasn't quite as hectic and busy as we thought it would be, so it's been smooth sailing so far. So.
I mean, I heard that it was going to be a record season in terms of traveling, but if you're traveling to see family, to spend, good quality time, you're willing to put in the effort.
I was prepared. I went early, and there were no lines at TSA, no lines to check my bag.
And that was Jennifer Spann from Atlanta, Jorge Rivas from Boston, and Mina Akbari from Miami, all of them passing through Ronald Reagan Washington National Airport today, which is where we also find NPR transportation correspondent Joel Rose. Hey, Joel.
Hey, Mary.
Hey, I can hear the terminal there behind you. Okay, so when we say this is going to be a Thanksgiving for the record books when it comes to air travel, what does that actually look like?
Up close here at DCA, I have to say it is a pretty well-oiled machine. I mean, the parking garage is nearly full. The pickup line at arrivals is a mess. It is very long, very slow. But the lines at security are pretty manageable. Nationwide, the TSA, the Transportation Security Administration, is expecting to screen 18 million people over this holiday week. The busiest days will likely be today and this Sunday. Right around 3 million travelers screened each day. Probably a little bit higher even than that on Sunday.
And so you're prowling around the terminal talking to folks. What are they telling you?
Well, folks here seem to be, for the most part, pleasantly surprised with how well things are going. I talked to Sophie Brooks from Somerville, Massachusetts. She flew into D.C. today with her husband and 2 children under the age of 4.
They were little angels so far. Now we're just hoping that the rental line is short. We also have a 1.5-hour drive coming up, so that will be questionable.
I think the bad news for Sophie and the rest of us is that traffic on the roads is also very heavy today. AAA is predicting a record number of people traveling by automobile as well. More than 71 million people over the holiday week. So, leave plenty of time if you're planning to drive as well.
I got to ask you, Joel, about the weather. Any places where that is disrupting travel?
Denver, for sure. They got a couple inches of snow today, and that has led to now hundreds of delayed flights there, by far the most of any U.S. airport. That front dropped several feet of snow up in the Rocky Mountains and then turned to rain across the middle part of the country. But most everywhere else is looking relatively good. Certainly not seeing anything like that big holiday meltdown of the winter holidays in 2022.
Thank goodness for that. Okay, any other trouble spots you're watching out for, though?
Yeah, one spot to keep an eye on is Newark Liberty International Airport outside New York City. The Federal Aviation Administration was forced to delay some flights there today because of an acute shortage of air traffic controllers for the New York airspace. And United Airlines, which has a hub in Newark, has been complaining about significant delays, quote unquote, all this month. United says more than 340,000 of its passengers have been affected by delays and cancellations so far. The FAA has acknowledged the problem. The FAA says in a statement that it is working to address a, quote, decades-long issue of staffing, unquote, in Newark. The FAA has moved some jobs from Long Island to Philadelphia to try to improve the situation, and it's also trying to hire more air traffic controllers, but that may take a while to show results. So if you are traveling through Newark or, really anywhere this holiday week, pack your patience, as they say in the business.
NPR's Joel Rose out with travelers today at D.C.'s Reagan National Airport. Thanks, Joel.
You're welcome.
Federal consent decrees can be a powerful legal tool to reform police departments. When former President Trump takes office again in January, the fate of investigations the Biden administration opened into police misconduct will become uncertain. NPR criminal justice reporter Mack Anthem is here to tell us more about the possible future of these agreements. Hey, Meg.
Hey, Ari.
Explain what a consent decree is and what it does.
Yeah, so it's basically an improvement plan for troubled police departments. It typically starts with a federal investigation, and then the Justice Department and usually a city negotiate a legally binding plan for systemic reform. A federal monitor makes sure that that plan is then carried out. The evidence, though, is kind of mixed on how effective they are. A main criticism is that these agreements can be very expensive to carry out, and they can stay in place for years. A judge decides whether a city has made the necessary changes. So Seattle, for instance, has been under its decree for more than a decade and has spent hundreds of millions of dollars on it.
And how have presidents tended to use consent decrees to change policing and police culture?
So the Obama Justice Department really popularized them, and then Trump's Justice Department severely limited their use. They only opened one investigation during his time in office. Biden's DOJ has opened 12 investigations, including in Louisville, Minneapolis, and Memphis, where police killed Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and Tyree Nichols, respectively. But none of those Biden investigations has been finalized into a decree.
Why would that be?
So a senior justice official that I spoke with said that these investigations just take longer nowadays than they did during the Obama years. There's just so much more digital evidence today. Tons of body-worn camera footage, for instance. Chrissy Lopez, though, says that doesn't totally explain it. She's a professor at Georgetown University, and under Obama, she was deputy chief in the DOJ division in charge of these decrees.
There does not appear to have been the sense of urgency that we felt during the Obama administration. We really tried to get the investigations done within a year and the consent decrees done within a year after that. And I just don't see that happening here.
Well, Biden's got a couple more months in office. Are they going to try to button these up or what?
Yeah, so some legal experts I spoke to said that they don't think cities have much incentive to keep negotiating with the DOJ if they can kind of just wait it out. But, we are seeing some evidence of movement from the DOJ. Last week on Thursday, the Justice Department released findings in its investigation into Trenton, New Jersey's police department, where it found widespread misconduct. And officials in Louisville and Minneapolis have been negotiating with the DOJ for months, so it is possible that those agreements will be finalized before Trump's inauguration. And the DOJ says to stay tuned on that and other matters.
And then looking ahead after the inauguration, if the Trump administration stops federal investigations into police misconduct, what happens then?
Well, communities can push for reform on their own at the local level. I spoke with Justin Terrell about that. He's the executive director of the Minnesota Justice Research Center.
No one is coming to save you. If you're thinking the DOJ is going to save you, even if they negotiate an agreement, it is just another tool. And the tool is only as good as the person using it.
So states can pursue police reform too. Minnesota, for instance, already has a consent decree with the city of Minneapolis that the state began to put that in place the last time that Trump was in office. But experts say that federal consent decrees send a strong message that no one is above the law, including the police.
That's NPR's Mack Anderson. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Straight on.
You're listening to All Things Considered.
And then turn left.
It's 5:44 and this is News 88.7 in depth. I'm Gail DeLauder. The Public Utility Commission issued its report on CenterPoint's handling of Hurricane Beryl just over a week before Governor Abbott's December 1st deadline. News 88.7 government reporter Andrew Schnatter looks at the PUC's recommendations and what could follow in terms of regulatory or legislative solutions.
One of the biggest areas the report identifies for improvement is that of communications. The commission called on lawmakers to codify a customer's right to speak with a live person to get updates on power outages and restoration times. Franklin Allaire of Katy lost power for more than 10 days after Beryl struck. He says he was able to speak with a live person most times he called, but the information he got was often far from helpful.
I think, a customer Bill of Rights is a great idea to, ensure that there are ways for customers like me and others to reach out and ensure that we get a real person who's aware of the situation.
The report also says utilities must improve communications with neighboring utilities, local governments, and emergency services as part of their preparations for major storms. And the report focuses on heading off problems that led to many of the outages during Beryl. Ted Curry is Director of Energy Studies at the University of Florida's Public Utility Research Center.
It looks like they're asking for a more standardized series of pole inspections and replacement. Basically replacing poles that may not meet current standards for resilience to wind. Also, something the Commission noted is that there is no standard for vegetation management in Texas.
Xanto Peabody lives in Kingwood. Storms regularly down power lines in his heavily wooded neighborhood.
Definitely maintenance around the lines has got to be a priority.
Like Franklin Allaire, Peabody was without electricity for 10 days after Beryl.
That's one of the things I'm hoping most for, is that the pathways for the lines will be maintained clear of vegetation that is going to short out the lines or knock the lines down in a storm.
The report puts responsibility for dealing with most of these problems on the utilities. Former Harris County Judge Ed Emmett is now an energy fellow at Rice University's Baker Institute.
CenterPoint has to act on it, basically. And I think they already are.
In a statement to Houston Public Media, CenterPoint says it's taking steps to protect against future hurricanes. The company said that it is, quote, implementing improvements recommended by an independent third-party expert and has already completed or begun 2/3 of their 77 recommendations. Again, Ted Curry.
To the extent that that's going to impact the costs for providing utility service, those costs are ultimately going to be borne by the people. But the people are also the ones that bear the cost of decreased quality of service and decreased access to service.
But the report also recommends the legislature approve tougher penalties for utilities when they fail to deliver. Xanto Peabody hopes his lawmakers are listening.
My understanding is that there's an up to $25,000 penalty for when it seems like the utility is not reliable enough. I think that's unbelievably too low.
This won't be the last time the PUC advises lawmakers on CenterPoint in the near future. It opened an audit into the utility amid charges that CenterPoint overcharged customers more than $100 million. PUC Chair Thomas Gleason says he wants to conclude the audit by April while the legislature is still in session. I'm Andrew Schneider in Houston.
And at 5:48, it's All Things Considered on your NPR station, News 88.7. 80 degrees right now here at the UH campus. I'm David Pittman. Out on the freeways, our newest problem is heading in on the Katy Freeway, eastbound I-10 at Taylor, wrecking the two left lanes, and it looks like you're pretty well stacked up before Studemont. And heading in on the Gulf Freeway, northbound 45, the wreck at Woodridge cleared not quite 5 minutes ago. You'll be in for an extra 10 minutes to make the drive from Monroe to Telephone.
Houston Public Media brings to you PBS World. Experience the personal connection behind the headlines with programming devoted to telling stories that humanize complex issues. PBS World on TV 8.6 and online at houstonpublicmedia.org.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from attorney mediator Ron Bankston, providing in-person, video conference, and hybrid mediation and arbitration services. More at ronbankston.com. Support comes from Smart Financial Center in Sugar Land, welcoming Kenny G's The Miracles and Holiday Hits Tour with a mix of holiday classics. Thursday, December 12th. Tickets at smartfinancialcenter.net. Support for Houston Public Media comes from Beeman Strong and Company. Real estate sales, purchases, and leases performed on an hourly basis like a law firm. Information at 713-552-1110. Houston Public Media presents the Moth Story Slam, December 3rd at River Oaks Theater. Doors open at 7 p.m. The theme of the night is Silver Linings, stories about the bright side. Tickets at houstonpublicmedia.org/The Moth.
Between now and midnight, we'll get down into the mid-60s. Then overnight, a cold front comes through, pushing us down into the 50s for much of the day. Overnight low Thursday going into Black Friday, 47. And then your Black Friday shopping day getting up to around 61 for the high. Again, right now it's 80 here at the UH campus at 5:50.
From NPR News, this is All Things Considered. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. 3 Americans have been freed from prisons in China. The Biden administration says they were all wrongfully held and that they are being reunited with their families for the first time in many years. They appear to be part of a prisoner swap, though details about that remain murky, as NPR's Michelle Kellerman reports.
Biden administration officials say they've been working on this deal for months. President Biden raised the issue of jailed Americans when he met recently with his Chinese counterpart, Xi Jinping, in Peru. Now U.S. officials say the diplomacy has paid off with the release of 3 Americans. Businessman Mark Swedan was held the longest. He was arrested in 2012 and accused of drug-related offenses. Jason Poblet represents the family.
After 12 years, Catherine, Mark's mom, and the entire Sweden family are extremely grateful that Mark will be back with them in Texas. Right now, the family is asking for privacy, but they will have more to say in the near future.
Chinese-American Kai Li is also part of the deal. He's been held since 2016 on espionage charges. The third person is John Leung, an elderly American who had residency in Hong Kong. He was sentenced last year to life in prison on spying charges.
I am absolutely thrilled to see these 3 individuals on a plane headed back to the United States.
Senator Jeff Merkley is a co-chair of the Congressional Executive Commission on China.
And it's just a tactic China has continuously employed, often in very unjust ways, and these folks have been held a long time. It's great to have them back.
The Oregon Democrat says the administration has not informed his committee about what China is getting in return.
These exchanges are exchanges. That is, almost always there's a quid pro quo. We don't know who has been released or what other measures the United States has taken. I will say that I really applaud the Biden administration for putting a lot of diplomatic muscle into this effort at the close of their administration to get these individuals released.
China has not commented, but Senator Merkley thinks Beijing may have wanted a deal done now before President-elect Trump returns to the White House and new issues arise. The State Department did change one thing that China wanted. A travel advisory once warned Americans to reconsider going to China because of the risk of being detained as bargaining chips. Now the State Department says there are no Americans being unjustly held in China, though it still tells Americans to exercise caution. Michelle Kellerman, NPR News, the State Department.
The podcast Song Exploder. A musician takes apart one of their songs and tells the story of how it was made. Recently, host Rishikesh Hirway spoke with Graham Nash about Our House from the 1970 Crosby, Stills, Nash and Young album Deja Vu.
Could you tell me about the day that you wrote this song? Do you remember it?
I do indeed. I had taken my girlfriend Joni Mitchell to breakfast at a delicatessen on Ventura Boulevard in Los Angeles. It was at the end of winter, a completely awful day, rainy and foggy and very, very cold. After breakfast, Joni and I were walking to where her car was parked, and we passed an antique store. Joni saw a vase that she wanted to buy. It was in the back, about 10 inches high, some hand-painted flowers around the edge, and Joni bought it. We collected the vase and drove to our house in Laurel Canyon. And as I went through the front door, I said to Joan, I said, "Hey, Joan, why don't I light a fire and you put some flowers in that vase that you bought today?" Well, that's all I needed. While Joni was in the backyard trying to find some flowers that hadn't died yet in winter, and I was at her piano, I got the first lines and wrote the song.
I'll light the fire. You place the flowers in the vase that you bought today.
Go straight on.
I'd love to listen to the vocal arrangement because I have these 3 tracks of your voice.
Such a cozy room. Such a cozy room.
2 tracks of David.
Such a cozy room.
And 2 tracks of Stephen.
Such a cozy room.
Anyone can sing the same notes as we can, that's no secret. But you can't sound like David and Stephen and I when we put our voices together and present it as one voice.
Keep right. Such a cozy room. Such a cozy room. Windows are illuminated by the sunshine through them. Fiery gems for you. Only for you.
So one thing I wanted to ask you about is this moment where you sort of split off into this counterpoint thing.
Our house is a very, very, very fine house.
So what happened is basically it was a mistake.
Really?
Oh yeah, it was David and Stephen just drifting off into a different part. But you see, sometimes mistakes can happen that really, really are not mistakes. And so once we did that, we made it a part of the vocal blend. But it was actually started out as a mistake.
Is a very, very, very fine house.
Okay, there's just one more thing that I wanted to play for you.
Our house is a very, very, very fine house with 2 cats in the yard. Life used to be so hard. Now everything is easy 'cause of
Straight
you.
on.
That's the time that we were in Philadelphia at the music hall there. And Joni was with me. And I started to, at soundcheck, play Our House. And she joined me
Straight on
vocal and piano.
And you place the flowers in the vase that you bought today.
Yep, that's me and Joni.
Hearing that version again, what does that evoke for you?
It was a very important time in my life. I mean, to live and love Joni Mitchell was incredibly special to me. And to be able to write a song about my actual home where I lived was very comforting for me. And it was easy to remember. That's when I first put my voice together with David and Stephen's in Joni's living room, with Joni as the only witness to the beginning of Crosby, Stills and Nash.
Beautiful. Graham Nash speaking there with Rishikesh Hirway, host of the award-winning music podcast Song Exploder.
Keep right and then exit right.
You're listening to All Things Considered from NPR News.
Support for NPR comes from the station and from the U.S. Treasury's Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, committed to informing that companies may be legally required to file beneficial ownership information. More at fincen.gov/BOI. From Eric and Wendy Schmidt, through the Schmidt Family Foundation, working toward a healthy, resilient, secure world for all. On the web at theschmidt.org. From Melville Charitable Trust, committed to ensuring all people have a safe, stable, and affordable home that allows them to thrive. Information about ways to prevent and solve homelessness is at melvilletrust.org.
Keep right.
And from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation at macfound.org.
We're a minute away from 6 on a Wednesday evening here on your NPR station, News 88.7. Heading in on the Katy Freeway eastbound I-10, they've cleared the wreck at Taylor, stacked up before Studemont, and it could take you up to an additional 10 minutes or so. And heading in on the Gulf Freeway northbound 45, that's about 15 minutes or so to get from Monroe to Telephone, thanks to an earlier wreck of Woodbridge.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from Theater Under the Stars with their production of Disney's Frozen, just in time for the holidays. On stage December 10th through the 29th. Tickets and more information are available at tuts.com.
Might see a pop-up shower here and there coming with a cold front overnight. It'll be quite breezy as well, with winds gusting up to about 20 miles an hour from the north and temperatures falling throughout the 50s tomorrow and highs in the mid-40s on Friday. Right now it's 80 here at the UH campus on your NPR station, KUHF Houston, a service of the University of Houston. It's 6 o'clock.
We are going home victorious now, says the woman, one of many in Lebanon displaced by war.
A ceasefire between Israel and Hezbollah took effect this morning.
For Wednesday, November 27th, it's All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. Ahead this hour, the leader of the political opposition in Venezuela has been in hiding since July.
When I called her today, she said the fight against President Nicolas Maduro goes on.
Maduro is totally isolated, weaker than ever, and our people want and needs to know that I'm here with them.
Plus, why Walmart says it's rolling back DEI programs.
And meet the 59-year-old grandmom who can give you a run for your money in the push-up department.
I'm attempting to break the world record for the most push-ups in 1 hour by a female.
Now the news.
Let's do this.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. Thousands of Lebanese refugees displaced by the ongoing war with Israel are returning home as a ceasefire takes hold there. If it holds, the ceasefire for the time being would bring nearly 14 months of fighting between the two sides to an end. The fighting between Iran-backed Hezbollah and U.S. ally Israel had threatened a wider conflict. NPR's Kat Lonsdorf is in Tel Aviv and has more on the agreement.
It also says that both Israel and Lebanon have the right to self-defense should the ceasefire be broken. This agreement was based largely on a UN resolution which was supposed to resolve the 2006 war between Israel and Hezbollah. It leaves securing the south to the Lebanese army, which, remember, is different than Hezbollah, and also the UN peacekeeping groups, which have already been in the area.
The ceasefire does not address the other war Israel is currently involved in, which continues in Gaza. Israeli airstrikes there earlier today claimed the lives of 11 people, including 4 children. Federal consent decrees can be a powerful tool for police reform. As NPR's Mack Anthem explains, the fate of investigations opened by the Biden Justice Department remains uncertain when Donald Trump takes office again.
A consent decree is basically an improvement plan, often aimed at police misconduct. Trump severely limited their use. The Biden administration opened a dozen investigations, but has not finalized any into a court-enforced agreement. Sharon Fairley, a University of Chicago law professor, says decrees are often very expensive for cities and last years. She says that gives cities little incentive to get these done.
I doubt any city is going to enter into an agreement right now knowing that the Trump administration is about to come in and they wouldn't do it.
A Justice Department official told NPR the department is still working to secure resolutions in places where it uncovered police abuse. Mack Anthem, NPR News.
The Rocky Mountains are covered with snow after a few early season storms. From member station KUNC, Alex Hager reports that's a good sign for the Colorado River, which gets the majority of its water from winter precipitation.
Colorado, Utah, and New Mexico are getting a snowy start to winter. Mountain ranges in those states are all above average for this time of year. Some regions have more than 170% of normal snow for late November. About 85% of the Colorado River comes from mountain snow. Once it melts around the end of April, it becomes the water supply used by 40 million people, from Wyoming to Mexico. Policymakers are hoping a wet winter will give them breathing room to come up with new long-term rules for sharing the river, which is shrinking due to climate change. For NPR News, I'm Alex Hager in Fort Collins, Colorado.
Based on the government's latest estimate, the U.S. economy expanded at a healthy 2.8% annual rate for the 3 months ending in September. That's virtually unchanged from the previous quarter. The Dow was down 138 points. This is NPR.
Live from News 88.7 in Houston, I'm Gail DeLauder.
And then
holiday spending is expected to increase this weekend at Houston department stores and outlets. Alicia Thomas with Houston Premium Outlets says one-stop shop locations are popular stores for gift shopping.
So our traffic throughout the year has been consistently higher than last year, and we've seen this positive trend accelerate recently. So I imagine we're going to see the same thing as we get to Black Friday.
Analytics from MasterCard shows spending is expected to increase this year by about 3.2%. About 250,000 people are expected in downtown Houston tomorrow for the annual Thanksgiving Day parade. News 88.7's Gabrielle Dawkins has a preview.
We have 19 floats in our parade this year and 21 high-flying balloons.
Susan Christian, the director of special events for the mayor's office, says this long-standing celebration is a spectacle to see.
It is a treasured tradition.
The parade starts at 9 a.m. on the corner of Lamar and Smith Street Thursday morning and ends around 11. Several streets will be blocked off for the parade.
This is a free event. You can come, pick out your spot, bring the entire neighborhood, but bring the kiddos down to just kind of celebrate what we have together.
Organizers encourage people to get there by 8 a.m. You can bring chairs, wagons, strollers, and blankets. There are no bag restrictions, but plenty of security will be present along the routes. I'm Gabrielle Dawkins, News 88.7.
It won't be cheap if you want to see UT and Texas A&M play in College Station this weekend. Some tickets are going for thousands of dollars. The two teams are meeting again Saturday night for the first time in 13 years. The Rockets play the 76ers tonight, and that game is just getting underway in Philadelphia. Cloudy skies this evening, about a 20% chance we could see some rain tonight. Overnight low is going to be around 58 degrees. Thanksgiving Day, partly sunny, high near 65. I'm Gail DeLauder, News 88.7.
Go straight on.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the George Gund Foundation, working to make Cleveland more vibrant, sustainable, and just, and setting an example for the nation. More information available at gundfoundation.org. This is NPR.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Mary Louise Kelly.
And I'm Ari Shapiro. The United Nations estimates that a quarter of Lebanon's population has been displaced by more than a year of war between Israel and Hezbollah. In the early hours of this morning, a U.S.-brokered ceasefire took effect, and so far it appears to be holding. And some of those people are going home. NPR's Lauren Frayer joined some of them on their journey south into what had been until yesterday a battle zone.
Car after car is loaded with belongings tied on top of the roof. It's bumper-to-bumper traffic on the coastal highway going south.
Zainab Suwaif says she ran from her border village when Israeli airstrikes began in September, hitched a ride to the capital Beirut, and had been sleeping on the floor of a school litter ever since. But we're going home now victorious, she says. What began in the dark with celebratory gunfire when the clock struck 4 a.m. turned into a massive parade of evacuees heading home. Cars blast music, people roll down their windows and high-five one another. There are yellow Hezbollah flags everywhere, evidence that the group has not been eliminated despite Israel killing nearly all of its leaders. Twice, different passers-by slipped into my car window different posters of the late Hezbollah leader Hassan Nasrallah, who was killed by an Israeli airstrike in September. Defiance and celebrations mask the cost to Lebanon of this war, though. More than 3,800 deaths, and damage the World Bank put at least $8.5 billion, a staggering sum for a country that's had so much economic turmoil and is still trying to overcome damage from the last war with Israel 18 years ago.
And as you drive this coastal highway down into South Lebanon, you begin to see sort of every few hundred meters there's something destroyed. There's a restaurant here. It looks like a tornado came through here. And it's all just debris. Some burned and gnarled rebar. Oh, it's like a little toy train for kids. And the front of it is all blackened. Oh my God, look at the crater. Looks like the size of a swimming pool, but deeper. I think it looks like there was mini golf here.
The damage generally gets worse as you drive farther south. closer to the Litani River, the boundary north of which Hezbollah is supposed to relocate its fighters. At one point, a man at a gas station told us to take a right, not a left, because Hezbollah was moving a cache of weapons around the corner. The celebratory mood from the highways around Beirut is gone well before you reach the city of Nabatea, where people are jumping. Just south of here, the Israeli military has told people not to go home because Israeli soldiers are still present in their villages. They have 60 days to withdraw. At one point today, they did open fire on what Israel says were Hezbollah operatives in a restricted zone. That doesn't appear to have affected the ceasefire, though. In Nabatea, a funeral is underway, presumably for one of the last people killed in this conflict. And a century-old market complex that draws people from all over the region is in rubble.
Sad. Boutique, house, life.
Rafif Hayek's son sits on her lap in their car and finishes her sentences. Their family's boutique is gone. They're not sure about their house. They're going there next. I ask how she explains this to her children.
My children, not explain. My children look this directly.
They see it with their own eyes, she says. At a main intersection in Nabatea, a coffee vendor sits on a crate in the street, pouring tiny cups of cardamom-scented brew from a brass pot and hands them out through car windows. Waji El-Mar never left, even when his house was destroyed. He happened to be crossing the street outside when it was hit. Now his neighbors are coming back, and he's welcoming them. He says he knows who to charge for the coffee and who to give it away to for free, depending on whose house is still standing and who lost people. Lauren Freyer, NPR News, Nabatea, southern Lebanon.
When Maria Corina Machado came to the phone today, she was speaking from an undisclosed location in Venezuela. Hi, Ms. Machado. This is Mary Louise Kelly in Washington. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Mary Louise.
Hi, I'm glad to speak with you.
Glad to speak with you as well.
Machado leads the political opposition in Venezuela. She has been in hiding since national elections there in July. Elections the opposition says it can prove it won. President Nicolas Maduro has ignored that, claiming victory himself without evidence and cracking down on anyone who disputes that. His government has threatened to arrest Machado, hence her decision to go into hiding. And she is alone. No staff, no aides, no friends.
That's the conditions we believe are proper for the security of others as well as for my own security.
Are you able to get fresh air, to go outside, to take a walk?
Not really, but I can complain because I have many of my colleagues that are right now in prison or under asylum or had to leave their country.
So, you're speaking to us from hiding. Why stay in Venezuela under these conditions?
Because I trust the Venezuelan people, and I have no doubt that the result of our fight will be the liberation of Venezuela. Maduro is totally isolated, weaker than ever, and our people want and needs to know that I'm here with them.
Yeah. I mean, your colleague in the opposition, Edmundo Gonzalez, has left for Spain because there's a warrant for his arrest. If you were outside Venezuela, you could speak freely. You could sit down with me in person. Would your voice not be louder?
I don't think so. I think at this point, Edmundo is doing a great job. He's the president-elect, and he's doing that job of engaging directly with the international sector. I believe Venezuelans need to know that I'm here with them and that we'll move ahead in the democratic transition to Venezuela, that this has no way back.
Let me turn you to a development this month, which is that the U.S. Secretary of State, Antony Blinken, referred to your co-opposition leader, Edmundo Gonzalez, with those words, referring to him as Venezuela's president-elect. First time he has done that. Do those words make any difference?
Oh, yes, they do, certainly. I think they send a very strong message
Go straight
to the
on.
rest of the world and to the regime as well. Because Maduro tells those that still support him that the world will, turn the page with Venezuela, and that he will be able to stay by violence. And this sends a message that this is not going to happen.
When you talk about President Maduro, Nicolas Maduro, being in decline, I understand that your movement has produced voting tallies to prove that he lost the election. And yet, you're in hiding. He's still in power. He's figured out how to get oil around sanctions. Is he in decline? Is he actually in a weaker position?
I have no doubt. I believe that every day that goes by, Maduro loses supporters in Venezuela and internationally. Maduro has been accused and denounced of committing crimes against humanity by the fact-finding mission of the United Nations. And every day that goes by, I believe the pressure from abroad and within
Go straight on.
Let's look ahead to January and to presidential politics here in the U.S. President Trump will return to office. I gather you know his pick for Secretary of State, Senator Marco Rubio. Have you talked to him since the U.S. elections?
No, I spoke with him before and with his staff, and he's a good friend of Latin America, and I think he's a freedom-loving person that will stand beside the Venezuelan people.
I'm remembering that last time Donald Trump was in the White House, his administration put pressure on Venezuela. They used economic sanctions to do that. Those sanctions wreaked such havoc on your country's economy that millions of Venezuelans left, migrated out. What are you hoping for this time from a second Trump administration?
Well, the fact is that the destruction of Venezuelan economy happened even before the sanctions were put in place. People leave the country and we have a growing migration. Not because of the economic situation, believe me, it's because of the lack of future. And everybody here knows that that future is directly linked to democracy and regime change. So if we want to stop migration, if we want to stop those flows from region to the United States, we have to go to the cause of the problem. And the cause of the problem right now is Maduro and his brutal regime.
What's next for you?
I'll keep doing what I'm doing right now, reaching out to every single person around the world to letting them know how we're
Go straight on.
to give hope, and also working and preparing for a peaceful transition.
And you're prepared to fight this fight as long as it takes, even from hiding?
Until the end. And we will win. We will prevail. I have no doubt.
That is Venezuelan opposition leader Maria Corina Machado, speaking with us from an undisclosed location in Venezuela. Thank you.
Thank you.
At 6:18 on a Wednesday evening, it's All Things Considered here on your NPR station, News 88.7.
PBS NewsHour.
Now more than ever, you need news you can trust. For nearly 50 years, millions have turned to PBS NewsHour for the solid, reliable reporting that has made NewsHour the most objective and credible news program on television. Unbiased, in-depth news that delivers substance over sensationalism. Elections, conflict, climate. Trust a news source that cuts through the noise with news that matters. Fair, thoughtful coverage of the events that impact our lives.
PBS NewsHour. Weeknights at 6 on Houston Public Media TV8.
Music at this time of the year often recaptures the past.
Luckily, if you're able to live long enough, you have memories and you're able to look back and go, that record really brought me back to a time, whether it was difficult or interesting or joyful. And for me, it's all three.
This week on With Good Reason, holiday music and memories.
Thanksgiving Day at 7 p.m. on News 88.7.
People move for all kinds of reasons. Jobs, property taxes, grandchildren. That story next time on Marketplace.
That's coming your way in 10 minutes, followed by The Daily at 7 o'clock.
Keep running. Support comes from the Eternal Gandhi Museum, Houston, the first ever freestanding museum in North America dedicated to preserving and promoting Mahatma Gandhi's legacy of nonviolent conflict resolution.
now open. Learn more at egmh.org. Support comes from Alley Theater, presenting A Christmas Carol, the tale of Ebenezer Scrooge and his encounters with the ghosts of Christmas past, present, and future. Now through December 29th. Tickets at alleytheater.org.
The cold front we've been talking about is marching through the Dallas area right now. It should be here well before daybreak. Temperatures falling into the 50s throughout the day, and the overnight low heading into Black Friday, 47. The Black Friday high right around 63. It's 6:20.
Support for NPR comes from this station and from Americans United for Separation of Church and State. For more than 75 years, AU has supported freedom without favor and equality without exception. Learn more at au.org/NPR. From Insperity, providing HR services and technology, from payroll, benefits, and HR compliance to talent development. Learn more at insperity.com/HR Matters. And from the sustaining members of this NPR station.
This is All Things Considered from NPR News. I'm Ari Shapiro.
And I'm Mary Louise Kelly. The Thanksgiving story most of us hear is about friendship, unity. But when Abraham Lincoln proclaimed it a national holiday in 1863, he likely wasn't thinking about pilgrims and Native Americans. He was more probably thinking about the Civil War. And so was the woman who had lobbied for Thanksgiving for years. Rund Abdel Fattah and Ramtin Arablouei at NPR's History Podcast Throughline bring us her story.
Sarah Josepha Hale was born in New Hampshire in 1788, not too far away from where the Pilgrims first landed.
She was the daughter of Revolutionary War heroes.
This is Melanie Kirkpatrick, author of the book Lady Editor, a biography about Sarah Josepha Hale.
She was very well educated.
She poured her energy into writing and publishing.
And then she wrote a novel, which was an anti-slavery novel. It came out in 1827.
And it landed her a job as the editor of a magazine called Godey's Ladies Book. It had a massive reach across the country. Sarah used her platform to push for the things she believed in. She supported women's education, though not women's suffrage. She opposed slavery and thought free black people should be repatriated to Africa. And she had a vision for creating a united national culture.
She thought that the revolution had united the American colonies politically but not culturally, and that the new country needed to develop its own culture, and the new country needed its own stories. They needed something to coalesce around.
And for Sarah, there was no better day to coalesce around than her favorite holiday, Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving in the early to mid-1800s was mostly celebrated in northern states, and generally on different days. It was not a national holiday, and Sarah wanted to change that.
She thought that if we could all come together and celebrate on the same day, that would help to bring Americans together. And as the Civil War approached, she also had the hope that it would forestall war.
She wrote columns in the magazine, making her case for a national holiday.
We believe our Thanksgiving Day, if fixed and perpetuated, will be a great and sanctifying promoter of this national spirit.
But she knew the audience of a woman's magazine wouldn't be enough. She had to convince the men in power.
She had a huge network, and she would handwrite personal letters to governors.
Will you use the influence of your high official status,
congressmen,
to establish the last Thursday in November,
members of the Senate,
as the annual American Thanksgiving?
Trying to get their support for her idea of a national holiday. And she did have success. She got many of the governors to agree on a given date, but not all of them. So then she thought that the better idea would be to get the president to proclaim a national day of Thanksgiving. 1863, she wrote to Lincoln.
Sir, permit me, as editress of the Lady's Book, to request a few minutes of your precious time.
1863 was a hard year for Abraham Lincoln. Tens of thousands of people had already died in the Civil War. The Confederate Army had notched a couple of major victories. And in June of that year, the Confederate General Robert E. Lee began invading the Union state of Pennsylvania. Just 5 days after reading Hale's letter,
Lincoln agreed and issued a proclamation,
making Thanksgiving a national holiday.
He asked Americans to come together with one heart and one voice. And he was again talking about Northerners and Southerners stopping the war and moving toward peace and reunification.
Sarah Josepha Hale's years of persistence had paid off. She'd helped start an American tradition that continues to this day. But what she really wanted, a shared national story that could help unify a divided country, that proved harder to achieve.
That was Melanie Kirkpatrick, author of the book Lady Editor, speaking with Throughline hosts Ramtin Arablouei and Rund Abdel Fattah. You can hear the whole episode on the Throughline podcast.
This story from Throughline comes from the Kauffman Foundation, providing access to opportunities that help people achieve financial stability, upward mobility, and economic prosperity, regardless of race, gender, or geography. Kauffman.org.
Donna Jean Wild is really ambitious.
I'm attempting to break the world record for the most push-ups in 1 hour by a female.
The 59-year-old grandmother of 12 set her mind to the challenge earlier this year after achieving another world record, longest plank held by a woman.
I guess it started when I was getting pretty close to doing the planking attempt. I was doing about 500 push-ups a day, just like to get ready for the planking. And when I was preparing for that, I thought, when all this is over, then I'm gonna look into the push-ups, I guess. Because I fell in love with doing push-ups too.
And so she pushed herself, literally, working on doing push-ups every day, little by little, to improve her endurance.
I would just try and do like 20 a minute for 30 minutes. And I just tried to increase that time. When it got pretty close, I could do like 1,000 push-ups in a short amount of time. Then that's when I applied to Guinness.
But the record for the push-up was not automatic. Wild says Guinness judges were there in person for her hours-long plank. They were not there to witness the 1,575 push-ups she did in an hour.
So she had to record herself and hire special witnesses to ensure there was a 90-degree bend in her elbow at the bottom of the push-up. She sent in her video and waited. Then an email came.
I was so grateful and so excited when I got that email that said, you now hold the record for the most push-ups in an hour for a female. I just cried. Happy tears.
Wild says 11 of her grandchildren were with her as she raced the clock for the push-up record.
In a video published by Guinness World Records, her grandchildren are counting down as she achieves her milestone.
3, 2, 1. They are my biggest cheerleaders.
Okay, so Wild's best advice on the perfect push-up?
Well, the best way to do a push-up, I would say, is to visualize the perfect push-up and then do it.
Congratulations, Donna Jean Wild. Keep pushing on.
At 6:29, and you've been listening to All Things Considered on your NPR station, News 88.7. Marketplace is 1 minute away.
Support comes from Signify Business Cash by Wells Fargo. With this business credit card, cardholders can earn rewards on business purchases with no caps or categories to track. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/signify. Terms apply.
Support Houston Public Media by donating a vehicle you no longer need. We'll take it in any condition. It's free to you, easy to do, and it could mean hundreds of dollars in support. Visit HoustonPublicMedia.org/cars to learn more. Thanks.
Tonight on Houston Public Media TV8. At 7, Nature presents Woodpeckers, The Whole Story. Then at 8, Nova continues the series Building Stuff. Followed at 9 by Secrets of the Dead. Tonight on TV8 or stream on the PBS app.
Marketplace is supported by the John Templeton Foundation, funding interdisciplinary research and catalyzing conversations to inspire awe and wonder. Learn more at templeton.org.
The macro economy still looking strong. We'll look at the micro, too. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by the Full-Time Plus Flex MBA program at Indiana University's Kelley School of Business, the only 2-year MBA that lets you choose where you spend your second year. More at go.iu.edu/KelleyFlex. And by Odoo, management software designed to unite every aspect of business into one simple platform. Odoo aims to take businesses to the next level. ODOO.com. Everything any business will ever need. And by the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to raising awareness and accelerating action on America's fiscal challenges to build a brighter economic future for the next generation. Learn more at pgpf.org.
In Baltimore, I'm Amy Scott, in for Kai Rizdal. It's Wednesday, November 27th. Good to have you with us. Consumer spending gets a lot of attention this week, what with Black Friday and all, but businesses buy stuff too. And today the Commerce Department is out with some new data on that spending. New orders for durable goods, products meant to last at least 3 years, increased slightly, 0.2% in October. And the department's Bureau of Economic Analysis is out with a revised estimate of third quarter GDP. The headline number remains the same. The economy grew at an annual rate of 2.8%. But one component that was revised upwards, what the BEA calls non-residential fixed investment, another measure of business spending. Marketplace's Stephanie Hughes has the details.
The electrical contractor Kelso Burnett is based in Chicago. And in the last 5 years, the company's gotten more business installing solar panels in Illinois.
As you can imagine, out in the middle of the cornfields, they're buying up some property and they're building the solar farms.
William Martin Jr. is a branch manager for the company. To build those solar farms, his company has to install metal pilings that support the panels. Kelso Burnett had been renting equipment to do the work. But earlier this year, it decided to spend $500,000 on its own pile drivers.
We see a big market in the solar field area, so dove right in and bought 2 machines.
His company also just bought some AI software to see if it speeds up the process of estimating the number of electrical outlets a building might need. That could allow them to bid on more projects.
It takes a little bit of time for everybody to kind of understand this new program, if we like it, if it's going to work for us.
The software purchase is considered an investment in intellectual property, which is a growing part of GDP. In the third quarter, businesses spent more than $1.5 trillion in IP. Economics professor Ethan Struve at Carleton College says a lot of companies are experimenting with AI these days.
The only way to know how it fits into your process is to try it and to see if it actually is successful.
Companies also spent more on transportation equipment in October. New orders were up 0.5% from the month before, according to the Durable Goods Report. Ryan Young, a senior economist with the Competitive Enterprise Institute, says that's a sign that automakers, for example, are stocking up.
They're buying now while it's cheap, anticipating that prices might go up later if there are new tariffs or other policies.
Remember, that Durable Goods Report is from October, so the companies buying don't know yet what would happen with the election. Young says they were preparing regardless. He says now that they know the outcome, companies that have been eyeing a pile driver, say, for a while, might be more likely to go ahead and buy it. I'm Stephanie Hughes for Marketplace.
One more item from the Bureau of Economic Analysis. The PCE Price Index, the Fed's preferred measure of inflation, rose at an annual rate of 2.3% in October.
Turn left.
So still a bit higher than the 2% the Fed is aiming for. On Wall Street, a dip before the holiday. We'll have the details when we do the numbers.
You have arrived at your destination. Your route guidance is now finished.
update on the housing market from the National Association of Realtors, which says pending sales of existing homes rose 2% last month. We hear all the time that home ownership is the main way people build wealth in this country. And of course, it takes some wealth to even become a homeowner. But some new data on the wealth gap between those who do own and those who rent is still pretty striking. The Aspen Institute finds that the median net worth of a homeowner is about $400,000. A renter's just about $10,000. Marketplace's Samantha Fields has more.
Owning a home is one of the main ways people build wealth in this country, especially if they're able to buy when they're young. Chris Herbert at the Joint Center for Housing Studies at Harvard says if you can buy a house in your 20s or early 30s
and pay off that 30-year mortgage over time, you're going to build wealth much earlier and accumulate more over your lifetime.
That's a big part of this story of homeowners having more wealth than renters. But it's not the whole story. Home equity only accounts for about half of the renter-homeowner wealth gap, according to the Aspen Institute.
People with higher incomes are more likely to become homeowners, but they're also more likely to have other kinds of investments.
Vanessa G. Perry at George Washington University says those investments include stocks, bonds, and 401ks. Nearly 80% of homeowners have at least some of those, but less than half of renters do.
There's a sort of ripple effect. When you have home equity and you have the opportunity to stabilize your housing expenses, that affords a household more opportunities to gain more wealth.
By paying down debt and putting money into savings or retirement. But with the huge run-up in home prices over the last few years, it's getting increasingly difficult for people to get into the housing market, especially without family money.
So that does make it even more important for us to think about, if you're a renter, how can you build that wealth as early as possible in your life?
Catherine Lucas McKay is with the Aspen Institute's Financial Security Program.
One of the easiest ways is just by opening a retirement account
or an investment account. And in recent years, McKay says that's gotten a lot easier to do on your own. I'm Samantha Fields for Marketplace.
We just heard from Sam about how hard it is to get a foothold in the housing market today. Now a story about folks a little further along in their housing and life journeys. Southern climes have long been a magnet for older Americans. Just think of all the retirement and over 55 communities in the Sun Belt. But warm weather and golf aren't the only attractions. Many baby boomers are moving to be closer to their grandchildren. Heather Gillers is a reporter for the Wall Street Journal, where she wrote about these so-called baby chasers. Heather, welcome to the program.
Hi, thanks for having me.
So who are these baby-chasing grandparents, and where are they moving?
So they are generally sort of the baby boomer generation, and they're mostly moving south. And this is sort of the intersection of a bunch of different population trends that have been building. One is that we've seen sort of a 10-year growth in population of young families in the southern U.S., Texas, Florida, Carolinas. And then, obviously these are traditionally places where older Americans have retired to warm weather, golf, and now there's a new attraction, which is that a lot of their grandbabies live there. At the same time, the baby boomers are a generation that have accumulated a lot of wealth. Many of them, have retirement portfolios that grew over a 10-year bull market. They have paid off or nearly paid off homes. So they're sort of cashing out and moving south where, they don't have to worry about high interest rates because they have this cash from selling their homes. They can buy a place and be near their grandkids.
I wanted to talk about some of the data behind this trend story. How do we know? I mean, obviously, there are a lot of reasons people move, and you mentioned the South has been a destination for retirees for a long time. How do we know that a lot of this is motivated by being close to the grandkids?
There aren't census takers going from house to house saying to grandmas, did you move here to come see your grandbaby? But we do have a lot of information from the real estate industry and a little bit of sort of like demographic data that sort of bears this out. So the National Association of Realtors surveys homebuyers, and the age of repeat homebuyers is at a 40-year high right now. And the biggest reason that they cite for selling their homes is moving close to friends and family. And then another trend in home building that kind of bears this out is that 55 and over communities within all ages communities have become very popular. So there's a clear trend of like older Americans wanting to live close,
ready to roll,
at least to somebody's grandchildren, and potentially to their own families.
Right, or maybe their own children, even if they don't themselves have kids.
Yeah.
Talk a little bit about the economic impact of this group on the cities where they're moving. As you said, these are folks that might have some accumulated wealth, a little more flexibility.
Yes. So the fastest growing city in the U.S. right now, the fastest growing city over 50,000 is Georgetown, Texas, and about a fifth of its population lives in one giant retirement community. And it's just been great for the city. I mean, this year it got a AAA bond rating. I mean, these are people who, they don't send their kids to school, so that's a costly service that they don't make use of. They pay taxes, they own property, they have a lot of spending power. Like a statistic I like to cite is that people 55 and over make up for 45% of personal spending in the U.S. So they're generally like a credit positive, as a bond rating agency would say. They do use ambulance services, but a lot of the other sort of services that cities spend a lot of money on, this population is not going to be a big user of those services.
Well, where do you see this going? Is there any way to know how lasting this trend might be?
Another really interesting piece of this is that eventually someone like that may be doing a lot of childcare, but as kids need less childcare, these grandparents are also getting older, and the U.S. has a real shortage of care workers for older people. So as these grandparents age and the grandchildren no longer need care, they may find that they are happy to be close to their children because they themselves need help.
Yeah. All right, Heather Gillers wrote about baby chasing grandparents making moves for the Wall Street Journal. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Chocolate has gone up over the past year or year and a half.
Sigh. But first, let's do the numbers. The Dow Jones Industrial Average fell 138 points, 0.3%, to finish at 44,722. The Nasdaq subtracted 115 points, 0.6%, to close at 19,060. And the S&P 500 lost 22 points, just shy of 0.4%, to end at 59.98. Holiday sales are expected to top $1 trillion in the U.S. this year, and of that, about $160 billion worth, or 16%, is expected to be returned, according to a new analysis from CBRE. Checking in on some online retailers who will have to deal with those returns. Amazon.com descended 1%, Walmart added 0.6%, Target pocketed 2.8%, and Etsy slid 0.9%. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace Numbers is supported by Rubrik, cyber resilience for unstoppable business, Rubrik.com. Marketplace is supported by Viking, dedicated to bringing travelers closer to the destination. Viking offers a small ship experience with no children and no casinos. Discover more at Viking.com. And by Fortune, dedicated to empowering leaders to make intelligent business decisions and delivering unbiased reporting since 1929. Subscription options, email newsletters, and more available at Fortune.com. And by the John Templeton Foundation, funding interdisciplinary research and catalyzing conversations to inspire awe and wonder. Dive deeply into the wonders of the universe at Templeton.org.
up on 6:45 on your NPR station, News 88.7.
It turns out wild turkeys are really intelligent, and they're born with an incredible genetic blueprint of their natural world.
They understood, almost without exception, every plant and every animal. They knew if it was edible, they knew if it was dangerous, and the specificity of that knowledge was stunning.
I'm Sarah McConnell. This week on With Good Reason, all about the turkey.
Turn left.
Thanksgiving Day at 9 a.m. on News 88.7.
Support comes from Environment Texas Research and Policy Center, presenting the documentary Plastic People, The Hidden Crisis of Microplastics, at the Match Theater on Wednesday, December 4th, open to the public. Details and more at environmenttexascenter.org.
Support comes from City Lights, downtown Houston's display of holiday lights and ice skating, sweet treats, and event vendors. Visitors experience the holiday season through 12 different villages spanning downtown. Details and hotel information at visithouston.com.
This is Marketplace. I'm Amy Scott. We often talk about history on this show as context for what's going on today, but there are so many stories that slip through the cracks, missing out on their due. Which is why I'm a big fan of The Memory Palace, a podcast launched in 2008 by Nate DeMeo, who I should say is a Marketplace alum. The Memory Palace features unexpected stories of people throughout history, both the not-so-famous and the famous, like Guglielmo Marconi, known as the father of the radio.
Marconi became convinced that sound never dies. That sound waves, once emitted, from a radio, from the vibrating strings of a Stradivarius, from whispering lovers, or a baby discovering how to make a ba or ga sound for the first time, lived on forever,
Turn left.
flowing permanently, but growing weaker and weaker with each moment. He just hadn't yet managed to build a radio powerful enough to tune in the signal.
Nate DeMeo is now out with a book based on the podcast called The Memory Palace, True Short Stories of the Past. Nate, great to talk with you again.
Oh, it's the best, Amy. So happy to be here.
So you've had this successful, beloved podcast for more than 15 years now. Why write a book?
I've always sort of wanted to do a book. Not only is it helpful to have a book as a business, and not only is it, a good thing to do, boy, do I love books. And I would think about the books that I had as a kid, these sort of collections of short pieces. Like I would stay home from school sick, and I would pick up for like the 12th time, some collection of Ripley's Believe It or Not stories. Or I would look again, for the 1,000th time at Where the Sidewalk Ends, the collection of short poetry. And I always wanted to collect stories from the Memory Palace, sort of old and new. And that might be like one of those books that I had as a kid and loved as a kid that don't really exist for adults, and make one for adults about adult concerns.
The name Memory Palace, I assume, comes from a technique that people use to remember stuff.
Yes,
Can you talk about that?
Yeah.
And how it inspired you?
Sure. I mean, I believe it was Cicero. It might not be, despite the fact what I do for a living. I often, I get the facts right on air, but I often get the facts wrong off air. But yeah, so back in the day, he came up with this technique that people would, walk around a space that they knew really well in their imaginations, like maybe it was their childhood home, and people would remember the speech that they were trying to say and remember 7 years ago today, and they would do that while remembering, the entryway to their parents' house. I like the notion of that we're creating this imaginary space again, where, by telling the story of Carlo Wallenda, the last of the original flying Wallendas, who died not too long ago. Thank you. As from natural causes, which is an incredible achievement in her family of people who died, usually in pain on their backs on the floor underneath some tightrope.
Spectacular fashion.
Yes, exactly. Like, that when I tell that story, and even when I just speak it right now and give you that image of a failed acrobat and one who happened to live a long life, it kind of does hang with you in your imagination. And the Memory Palace felt like an appropriate name that way.
There's so many beautiful stories in this book. Many of them existed in audio form on your podcast, but you also turn the lens on yourself and your own family for several chapters. So you find this picture of your grandparents at the beach that complicates this story that you had been telling yourself about them. Can you talk about that and just how it kind of informed your thinking about history?
Yeah, absolutely.
Writ large?
Sure. And living in that house, I was exposed to all of these sort of different artifacts of my own family. And there was this one photograph that everybody in the family had of my parents, my grandparents, young and attractive in the early 1940s, clearly in love, with their arms around each other on the beach. And this was a day that I had heard about from my grandmother a million times. She would talk about the day that she went to the beach with my grandfather, and they rode back in some Studebaker, and they piled into the back, and she had to sit in his lap. And as they were sitting there, the charge between them, she realized that she was in love, and I'd heard this story forever. And here was this incredible picture. But then I also found this other photograph. And in this photograph, they are not sort of intertwined. They are not beaming with love. They are kind of sitting next to each other in what almost feels like discomfort. But the implications of these two pictures were remarkable. That maybe the picture where they're lovey-dovey was the second picture, and maybe the photographer. And I had never even thought about who this photographer would be. They seem uncomfortable. He said, "Hey guys, I know what's going on with you two. Like, well, who are you trying to kid?" Or maybe he's like, come on. Like, give me some action here. I don't know what it was, but there's something to me about that second photograph that speaks to all those in-between moments, all the life we live between the stories we tell ourselves about our lives. That is where life takes place, and that is where I like the Memory Palace to live.
So back to the podcast, where this all started. The economics of the industry are really difficult right now, especially when it comes to ad sales. But you've been keeping this going now more than 15 years. How are you staying afloat? And are you optimistic that you can keep doing what you love to do and have done so well?
The answer kind of is it has sort of ever been thus, right? The way that I was doing this thing and the way that it was, sort of particularly sincere and particularly idiosyncratic, the stories themselves in their idiosyncrasy and in their sometimes strangeness were drawing people to it. And as the podcast Serial suddenly sort of like lifted all boats, and if you happened to be in the water at the time, there was suddenly a way to draw advertisers to you. And there were always ways like throughout that I could have I could have stepped it up in a certain way and maybe like produced them more frequently. But I realized in producing them more frequently, they would not be as good. And that is, of course, the way that every creative person in every sort of creative industry is wondering what, they're going to do next. Like, and as we expand, will the service that we provided, and in my part, that service is ridiculous. It's writing tiny little, deeply earnest stories focused on wonder about the past. Like, that is a weird product to sell.
I wouldn't call it ridiculous.
Okay.
It's very, very important and moving.
Well, thank you very much.
Nate DeMeo, creator and host of the Memory Palace podcast and now author of the book by the same name. Nate, so great to talk to you. Congratulations, and thanks for joining us.
Couldn't be happier to be here, Amy.
Okay, now to chocolate. Shop owners like Kristen Thalheimer Bingham of Dean Sweets in Portland, Maine, are gearing up for the holiday rush. We checked in to see how she's doing.
The season is upon us, and we are very happily busy. Everyone is working extra hours, starting early and staying late. Our 2 stores are bustling. Our phone is ringing. We've been working the past 6 months to make sure that these holiday weeks are the best they can possibly be. And every year we challenge ourselves to do the holidays better. I think a lot of people are already aware that the cost of chocolate has gone up over the past year or year and a half due to some pretty tough climate issues that have affected the cocoa growing regions. We've watched as prices of chocolate and cocoa have gone up at least 3 separate times in the past year, totaling about a 20% increase in the cost of dark chocolate and a 40% increase in the cost of milk and white chocolate. In our store and in conversation with customers, I've been watching for signs to see whether spending is up or down and whether people are being careful in their purchases or shopping without a lot of worry. And I'm happy to say that at least in our small chocolate world, I see signs of a good season ahead. I'd like to think that every year we as a team get a little smarter about how to prep for the holidays and especially how to build the inventory that will get us through from Thanksgiving to the end of December. And as much as we plan and look at our numbers and anticipate, there are always going to be surprises. Surprise orders are really the best because if we've planned well and built our inventory, we're able to jump on those surprises and get the chocolate out the door quickly. And that's what builds the business, not only for this year, but hopefully also for the coming years. So even though we've been working for months to get ready for these next few weeks, it's actually still early days for us. But then after Thanksgiving, everything turns up a notch, a big notch. So our test each year is to keep our energy up, to take breaks when we need to, and to work through this holiday season.
Kristen Thalheimer-Bingham of Dean Sweets in Portland, Maine.
Marketplace is supported by Babbel for Business. Babbel's professional language learning platform offers practical and industry-specific language courses designed for faster, better learning and a more culturally inclusive workforce. Learn more at babbelforbusiness.com. And by Revenued, providing working capital for businesses whose cash flow is holding them back. Revenued approves businesses based on revenue, not credit, and funds can be approved and available in just one day. Visit getrevenued.com.
This final note on the way out today, something to consider as you load up your dinner plate tomorrow. The nonprofit ReFed estimates some 316 million pounds of food, more than $500 million worth, will go to waste this Thanksgiving holiday, including the equivalent of more than 8 million turkeys. And I didn't realize so many people don't even like turkey until I read this quote from journalist Brian McManus in Vice, who wrote, "It is almost without fail a dried-out, depressing hunk of sun-baked papier-mâché, a jaw-tiringly chewy, unsatisfying, and depressingly bland workout." Whatever your feelings about turkey, that's some juicy writing. Our media production team includes Brian Allison, Jake Cherry, Jessen Dueller, Drew Jostad, Gary O'Keefe, Charlton Thorpe, Juan Carlos Tirado, and Becca Weinman. Jeff Peters is the manager of media production. And I'm Amy Scott. We'll be back tomorrow. This is APM.
It's coming up on 6:59 on a Thanksgiving Eve here on your NPR station, News 88.7.
You can't tackle life's big challenges if you let the little ones get you down. That's why Houston Matters sweats the small stuff once a month as we seek out your Houstonian pet peeves. Email them to talk@houstonmatters.org. Then join us for the next Houston Matters.
That's Monday morning at 9 on News 88.7.
Turn left.
Between now and tomorrow's sunrise at 6:58, we're expecting a cold front to blow through. About a 20% chance of a shower or two to come along with that. We'll hit a low before midnight around 65, and then temperatures will fall throughout the day, right around mid to lower 50s for dinner time. The overnight low going in Black Friday in the mid-40s, so wear the parka if you're going to be camping out in front of any sort of big box store. And then mostly sunny Black Friday with the high approaching 60. Right now it's 77 degrees here at your NPR station, KUHF Houston News 88.7, service of the University of Houston. I'm David Pittman. Hope your Thanksgiving holiday is as good as can be expected. We'll be back Monday afternoon at 2 at 7 o'clock.
I think that an important takeaway from this story is how the Israeli military has its military standards being deteriorating to a place that it haven't been ever before, namely using Palestinians as human shields in this widespread way.
I'm Sabrina Tavernisi. That's coming up on The Daily from The New York Times.
The Daily is supported by Storyworth. Each week, Storyworth emails a loved one a question about their life. After a year, they'll publish family memories into a bound book to keep forever. Learn more at Storyworth.com. And by Progressive Insurance. The Name Your Price tool provides a range of coverage options. Progressive.com. Price and coverage match limited by state law. Distribution of The Daily is made possible by American Public Media.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. President-elect Donald Trump announced that former National Security aide and retired Lieutenant General Keith Kellogg will be his special envoy to Russia and Ukraine. NPR's Franco Ordonez reports Kellogg will lead Trump's negotiations to end the war.
Trump said in a statement that Kellogg was with him right from the beginning, and that, quote, "We will secure peace through strength and make America and the world safe again." Trump has promised to end Russia's war in Ukraine. Kellogg's appointment could shed some light on how he expects to accomplish that. Kellogg wrote a plan for the America First Policy Institute that suggested establishing a demilitarized zone between Russia and Ukraine. The plan also includes conditioning military aid for Ukraine on the government entering peace talks. To entice Putin, Kellogg suggests that the president offer to put off NATO membership for Ukraine. The U.S. would also offer to lift all sanctions if Russia signs a peace agreement that is acceptable to Ukraine. Franco Ordonez, NPR News.
3 Americans that have been held for years in China are being released. The White House announcing the agreement with Beijing, which comes in the final months of the Biden administration. All 3 individuals have been designated as being improperly detained by the U.S. government. One of the individuals was being held on drug charges, while 2 others were in prison on espionage charges. It's not clear what prompted the release. Missouri will soon stop enforcing one of the strictest abortion bans in the country. St. Louis Public Radio's Jason Rosenbaum reports the state's attorney general is trying to salvage other abortion restrictions.
Missouri Attorney General Andrew Bailey acknowledged a constitutional amendment voters approved this month protecting abortion rights makes the state's near total ban unenforceable. That means the state will allow abortions up to around 24 weeks of pregnancy on December 5th. But in court filings responding to a lawsuit from the state's Planned Parenthood affiliates, Bailey's office contended that a judge should not strike down other restrictions, including abortion clinic licensing requirements and a 72-hour waiting period. Planned Parenthood officials say getting rid of those other state laws restricting abortion are crucial to reopening abortion access across the state. A judge is slated to consider Planned Parenthood's lawsuit next week. For NPR News, I'm Jason Rosenbaum in St. Louis.
2 Tennessee tax preparers have been indicted by a federal grand jury. That's after prosecutors contend Renata Walton and Nicole Jones allegedly submitted 65 million false claims for refunds under programs designed to help businesses during the COVID-19 pandemic. The pair indicted on more than 50 counts, including wire fraud, money laundering, and preparing false tax returns, as well as
This programming is sponsored by City Lights, downtown Houston's display of holiday lights and ice skating, sweet treats, and event vendors. Visitors experience the holiday season through 12 different villages spanning downtown. Details and hotel information at visithouston.com.
New York over what they contend is substandard medical treatment. The attorneys alleging the 72-year-old Weinstein has been denied medical care while jailed at the city's notorious Rikers Island complex. The appeals court has issued a ruling nullifying a 2020 rape conviction in New York. Weinstein faces a retrial. The claim seeks $5 million in damages for mistreatment. Weinstein has denied any wrongdoing. Researchers in Europe have published what could be the largest ever study of dinosaur poop. NPR's Jeff Brumfield says the fossilized droppings provide clues about how they came to rule the Earth.
Everyone knows an asteroid killed the dinosaurs, but how did they come to dominate in the first place? Martin Kvarnström is a paleontologist at Uppsala University in Sweden.
We know a lot about the life and extinction of the dinosaurs, but not so much about the rise of the dinosaur.
To learn more, Kvarnström and his colleagues analyzed over 500 fossilized poops to see what they were eating.
That's a lot of poop.
They found that early dinosaurs had more diverse diets than other lizards alive at the time. That probably helped them thrive during some major shifts in climate in the Triassic period. The work appears in the journal Nature. Jeff Brumfield, NPR News.
Mortgage rates came down slightly this week, though the average interest rate on a 30-year loan remains close to 7%, falling to 6.81%. That's according to mortgage buyer Freddie Mac. The rate is below a year ago, though, when the benchmark lending rate was at 7.22%. I'm Jack Spear, NPR News in Washington.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include Jarl and Pamela Moe, focusing on civil liberties, foster youth, public radio, and the arts. And the Public Welfare Foundation, committed to advancing transformative youth and criminal justice reforms.
From the New York Times, I'm Sabrina Tavernisi, and this is The Daily. Overnight, Israel agreed to a ceasefire with the Lebanese armed group Hezbollah, a major turning point in one of the wars Israel has been fighting since Hamas attacked it on October 7th. But the war in Gaza shows no signs of ending, with Israel coming under increased scrutiny for the way it is conducting it. Today, a Times investigation into one controversial tactic: the Israeli use of Palestinian detainees as human shields, and what it reveals about the nature of the conflict. My colleague, Natan Odenheimer, explains. It's Wednesday, November 27th. So, Natan, a lot has been happening with Israel in the past few days. We had the ceasefire with Lebanon and Hezbollah on Tuesday night. And the week before, the International Criminal Court issued arrest warrants for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Defense Minister Yoav Gallant. They issued those warrants for war crimes and crimes against humanity in Gaza. You, Natan, have been investigating another practice by the Israeli military, one that's unconnected to what happened in the court, but seems to also raise questions about the rules of war. And that is Israel's use of Palestinians as human shields. Tell me exactly what you found.
So actually, I stumbled into this story. Around January 2024, I was filling my water bottle at the gym when I heard someone who I quickly understood was an Israeli soldier who recently returned from Gaza, talking about seeing Palestinians being sent into Hamas tunnels. That what he was explaining is that the military is using Palestinians as human shields, sending them into Hamas tunnels ahead of Israeli forces to probe those dangerous areas.
So in other words, this is an Israeli soldier you're overhearing. The guy just came back from Gaza, and he's recounting how they used Palestinians as human shields in Gaza.
Precisely. And I immediately wanted to know more. If true, if they were using Palestinians in this way in combat, this would be very, very wrong and illegal under both Israeli and international law. So I injected myself into the conversation, challenged him a bit to see how insistent he is, and he stood behind this story. And I went back home that day knowing that I have to get to the bottom of this. to understand if this is something that only happens in one or two places and is very local, or is this something that is actually a widespread phenomenon across the military?
So what did you do next? How did your reporting take shape?
Well, so I had one lead, right? I was able to get his number, and I called him up a few days later. Introduced myself as a journalist, said that I'm interested to hearing more of his thoughts about how the war is being fought. And when we got to this topic again, he shared a few more details, telling me more or less where it took place. But at some point he closed in and said that he'd want to stop the conversation there. He said that he's not very willing to talk about this anymore.
So basically he went dark before you could actually understand exactly what this phenomenon was.
Right. And we had a lot of questions. We wanted to know how widespread it is, who are those Palestinians, and mainly, who authorized this? And slowly, we were able to find more people. Some of them came forward because they thought that it's very disturbing. Others, we just kept on asking those questions, and we were able to piece together a full picture.
And what did that picture show?
So over a course of about 10 months of investigation, Bilal Shabir, my colleague in Gaza, and Patrick Kingsley, the Jerusalem bureau chief of the New York Times, were able to uncover a disturbing practice of the Israeli military in Gaza. The Israeli military was using Palestinians as human shields in Gaza. They were using them to probe Hamas tunnels, and they sent them ahead of forces into homes that they were afraid were booby-trapped by Hamas. In some cases, Palestinian detainees were dressed as IDF soldiers, and in others, they were giving body cameras to take with them to give live feed to Israeli soldiers.
Why use Palestinians for this? Why do this at all, for that matter? You know, Israel has an incredibly sophisticated military and presumably the technology to do this kind of work.
Right. So there are different reasons. So first off, as great as drones and robots and even canine dogs can probe tunnels, a human being that can walk and move objects is way more efficient in probing areas. Sometimes a person can do tasks that a drone and a robot can't really do. And the other thing is that after 3 months of war, a canine dog is not as efficient as it was in the past. They're too traumatized and they're confused from all the smell of the explosives around. So if they lose their orientation. So whenever sniffer dogs, robots, or drones weren't good enough to probe the tunnels or walk ahead of forces into homes, they started using Palestinian prisoners as human shields for dangerous tasks.
So the Israeli military is using people, Palestinian detainees, to do this very dangerous job that even dogs at this point can't do. Were you able to talk to anyone who this actually happened to?
Yes, so our reporter in Gaza, Bilal Shabir, spoke with 3 Palestinians who spoke on the record about their experience as being used as human shields. One of them was a pharmacist named Bashir Eldal. He's a 43-year-old father of 4 from northern Gaza.
Okay.
In the beginning of the war, he and his family fled south. And then around mid-November, he decided that he wants to make a risky trip back to his home to get some essentials, some things that his family really needed. At that point, the Israeli military considered any Palestinian walking around these unpopulated areas as a potential Hamas operative.
I see, because this was after the Israelis had told everybody to evacuate, so anybody still there would...
This programming is sponsored by City Lights, downtown Houston's display of holiday lights and ice skating, sweet treats, and event vendors. This programming is sponsored by Collaborative for Children, with a mission to measurably improve early childhood education throughout Greater Houston. Giving Tuesday is Tuesday, December 3rd. More info at collabforchildren.org.
To his account, was partly ruined. There were glass all over the floor. And as he was walking, he was injured by this glass.
Because his feet were bare.
Yes, exactly. His feet were bare. And the soldiers were staying behind giving him directions from a megaphone. So they order him to move around the yard, looking into different places they thought were potentially booby-trapped or an entrance to a tunnel. And then there was noise coming out from around an electricity generator. And the soldiers got really afraid and started shooting in that direction. But it turned out that it was a kitten that made all this noise. And he said that some of the soldiers laughed in relief.
Wow. Was he hurt?
He wasn't hurt from the shooting, but he was injured from walking barefoot on the glass. So they used him as a human shield in several instances, but eventually they decided to take him into Israel and send him to an Israeli detention center. And I think that one of the things that really sent chills into my arms when I heard this story is that he said that he was excited, happy, and relieved to get there, knowing that he's outside of this dangerous zone.
Wow, so that actually shows you how frightening that was for him, that he felt better once he got to the Israeli detention center, not generally the kind of place that a Gazan would tend to feel very safe in.
Yeah, and I think that it's also important to mention that he was treated there for his injuries, but also released later on, sent back to Gaza, which tells us that the Israeli intelligence did not think that he was involved with any militant group.
Right, that he was essentially just a civilian.
Yeah.
Keep right, and then exit right.
And what we later found out is that El Dalo's experience wasn't that rare. The Israeli military used Palestinians as human shields again and again throughout the war.
We'll be right back.
The Daily is supported by Total Wine & More. With so many bottles to choose from, Total Wine helps make it easy to find everyone's favorite. Find what you love and love what you find at TotalWine.com. Drink responsibly. Be 21. Listeners of The Daily, get to the heart of the stories shaping the world. For more on today's episode, go to nytimes.com/thedaily. Distribution of The Daily is made possible by American Public Media. APM produces and distributes programs that entertain and engage audiences everywhere.
This is News 88.7.
I'm Jeremy Hobson. Next time on The Middle, millions of Americans are now using drugs like Ozempic and Wegovy to lose weight. So what do you think of these drugs? Have they changed your life, or are they just another weight loss fad?
They're excellent resources, and we're excited to have them as a resource, but they're not a magic bullet.
Joining us, 2 leading obesity medicine doctors, plus calls from around the country, next time on The Middle.
Tomorrow evening at 8 o'clock here on News 88.7.
Support comes from Senior Health Services, helping Houston area seniors who are concerned about changes in their Medicare plan by providing a variety of options, including Medicare supplements, Medicare Advantage, and Part D drug plans. More at seniorhealthservices.com.
Support comes from Collaborative for Children, with a mission to measurably improve early childhood education throughout Greater Houston. Giving Tuesday is Tuesday, December 3rd. More info at collabforchildren.org.
Natan Odenheimer on the Israeli practice of using Palestinian detainees as human shields. So, Natan, you said that you eventually came to understand that the story of Bashir, the pharmacist, was actually not that rare. But what was the actual scope of this? What was the scale?
So it's very difficult to understand the scale, but we spoke to 16 Israeli defense officials and soldiers. Some of them participated in this practice, and most of them described it as a rather routine practice. And it seemed to us that this practice became more and more widespread throughout the war. And one of the reasons that made us understand that is that we went to some people in, say, April or March and asked them if they know anything about it. And they gave us a hard no. They said, this is not something that they would imagine people would be doing. But then again, when we circled back in June or July, suddenly they said that they came across it and even saw it with their own eyes.
So the practice seemed to have gotten much more widespread as the war went on.
Exactly, Sabrina. And we were able to confirm that this took place in at least 11 different squads throughout the Gaza Strip. So from the north to the south in 5 Palestinian cities. And what really gave us a clear idea that this is quite commonplace practice was that it had a term. A soldier who came back from the battlefields told us that already in November, he heard a senior commander explain to his deputy that a nearby unit is asking for either a mosquito or a wasp.
Keep left. And what does he mean there? I mean, mosquito and wasp.
So, luckily for us, the deputy didn't know either. And the more senior commander explained to him that a mosquito is a Palestinian who was detained nearby in Gaza and was then being used as a human shield in tunnels or in other dangerous places. As for wasps, we got varying accounts from sources. What we do know is that a wasp is someone who was in Israel and was brought into Gaza by Israeli intelligence officers for brief and specific missions. And there was some disagreement about whether these were detainees or whether these were paid collaborators who volunteered to enter Gaza with the military.
Okay, so in other words, mosquitoes are kind of like Bashir, the pharmacist. They maybe got swept up in something inside Gaza, but wasps were different. They were brought from Israel back to Gaza and used there. But why would that happen? What is the purpose of moving them? Seems quite complicated to do.
So, what I understood from several of the soldiers is that these are sometimes Palestinians who have knowledge of the tunnels or other places. Sometimes they were being used as human shields going into those tunnels ahead of the forces, but they were also used for intelligence and sometimes to point to places where they told the Israeli military could potentially be makeshift graves of hostages. So places that Hamas have hidden the bodies of Israeli soldiers taken captive on October 7th.
So in other words, they might have some specific knowledge of where to look and where to find things.
Exactly. The Israeli military was hoping to squeeze as much information as they could from those people. But the flip side of it is that it also created a lot of paperwork and bureaucracy and required logistics and coordination by different units and different agencies as well. This suggests that senior commanders did not only know about it, but sanctioned at least several versions of this tactic.
And what did the Israeli military say to you when you confronted them about the practice before you published your article?
The Israeli military did not deny this. They said in the statement that its directives and guidelines strictly prohibit the use of detained Gaza civilians for military operations. It added that the account of the Palestinian detainees and soldiers interviewed by the Times would be examined by the relevant authorities.
So they said they'd look into it. What exactly are the laws and conventions around this?
So using civilians or militants as human shields in a battlefield is completely illegal, not only by international law, but also by Israeli law. And Israel has some experience with that. About 2.5 decades ago, the Israeli military used Palestinian civilians for risky missions, mostly in the West Bank. And this went to court. And the Israeli Supreme Court said that this is completely prohibited under Israeli law and ordered the military to stop with this practice.
But you showed here that they're doing it again. What happened after your story published?
Well, we know that it was discussed in the military and the government, but we can't really tell you if the military took serious steps in order to prevent it. But it's also important to note that the intensity of the war in Gaza went down significantly in the past few months, and it's possible that this practice isn't as widespread as it was in the height of the war. But as far as I know, not one Israeli officer or conscript was punished or even investigated for participating in this practice.
Natan, I'm curious about those Israeli soldiers that you talked to and how they saw this practice. I mean, fundamentally, it was something that was meant to protect them, of course, but clearly some of them must have felt uncomfortable with it because they were talking to you, a journalist, about it.
Right. We wouldn't be able to report on this story if it wasn't for the many Israeli soldiers who felt disgust and disturbed and horrified by the fact that the Israeli military is using this practice. One soldier told us that his entire platoon pushed back so hard that they basically stopped using this practice in their platoon, releasing the 2 Palestinian civilians who they were using as human shields. And I think that one thing that really resonated with me is that a soldier said that, even if this war is justified, it doesn't mean that everything we do or everything that we can do in this war is justified.
Natan, at a high level, it seems like what your reporting shows, and correct me if I'm wrong here, is that the Israeli military, like Hamas, is willing to sacrifice Palestinian civilians for their own military purposes. And Israel, of course, accuses Hamas of hiding within civilian populations, essentially using Palestinians as human shields in Gaza. And now we know that Israel is also using Palestinians as human shields. So I'm wondering if you think that the correct way to understand your reporting here is actually a sort of shared disregard, both on the part of the Israeli military and Hamas, for Palestinian civilian life.
Well, there is a common thread in the disregard to Palestinian lives, and both are terribly wrong. But they're each going about it in their own way. Hamas is a terrorist organization that is showing disregard for its own people, whereas Israel is a sovereign state that is violating the rules of war. And I think that an important takeaway from this story is how the Israeli military, which is a military of a state that is a member of the UN, that has, the most powerful nations in the world as allies, has its military standards being deteriorating to a place that it haven't been ever before, namely using Palestinians as human shields in this widespread way. And one way to understand how it could have deteriorated to this point is to be reminded of the shock of Israeli society after seeing the October 7th atrocities. And the Israeli society was just traumatized by this, which clouded the moral judgment of many Israeli soldiers walking into their roles in the military and later marching into Gaza.
Go straight
and
on.
Also made them think that Hamas are Palestinians and that Palestinians are Hamas, which is something that is a bit hard for the greater Israeli society to understand, that there are many Palestinians who oppose Hamas. There are many Palestinians who are suffering from Hamas and who suffered from Hamas even from before the war. But this shows a deterioration in the regards to human lives by the Israeli military, and something that we've never seen before.
Where, then, does Israel go from here?
So we're in the stage of the war in which the intensity of the fighting is winding down in Gaza, and also the ICC have just issued the orders against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and former Minister of Defense Yoav Gallant. So these two things make it harder for Israelis to ignore the consequences of the war in Gaza, namely the vast destruction and the many tens of thousands of Palestinians who died in this conflict. And now Israeli society that has justified this war throughout needs to face unjustified parts of it, like in the case that Bilal, Patrick, and I uncovered about how it's using Palestinians as human shields.
Natan, thank you.
Thank you, Sabrina.
Natan Odenheimer covers Israel for the New York Times.
Go
The
straight
Daily
on.
is supported by BetterHelp, committed to supporting mental health through therapy and helping clients find balance. Clients are matched with one of 35,000 therapists for online therapy from anywhere at betterhelp.com/public. For everything you need to know about the most important stories of the day, you're listening to The Daily from the New York Times, distributed by American Public Media. APM produces and distributes programs that entertain and engage audiences everywhere.
The Daily is powered by the journalism of the New York Times and is distributed by APM, American Public Media. You can go deeper into the stories you hear on The Daily by going to nytimes.com/The Daily. That's it for The Daily. I'm Sabrina Tavernise. See you tomorrow.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from Mercury Chamber Orchestra, presenting Christmas with Nicole Houston, a concert of holiday music from Baroque to modern melodies. December 7th at the Wortham. Tickets at mercuryhouston.org. Support comes from Signify Business Cash by Wells Fargo. With this business credit card, cardholders can earn rewards on business purchases with no caps or categories to track. Learn more at wellsfargo.com/signify. Terms apply.
Rachel Cohen had decided that volunteering her time wasn't really worth her time.
I'm 32 years old, and I'd say really since I was in late high school, junior, senior year, I started to see volunteering as kind of pointless. It wasn't going to make a big difference on the things I cared about. It wasn't going to move the needle, so I just stopped doing it.
But then she changed her mind, and then that changed her life.
Hi, it's Rachel with We Are Family. I have groceries and produce.
Ahead on Today Explained, you will need something good in 2025, and we have an idea for you.
Live from NPR News in Culver City, California, I'm Dwayne Brown. In Lebanon's capital, celebratory gunfire erupted early today, marking the start of the Israeli-Lebanon ceasefire after more than a year of fighting between Israel and Iran-backed Hezbollah militants. NPR's Lauren Frayer has more on the festive mood and the reality many people returning home will face.
There are minivans packed with families' belongings tied on car roofs, people blasting music, beeping their horns, cheering. A young boy knocked on my car window and handed me a poster of Hassan Nasrallah, the Hezbollah leader who was killed in an Israeli airstrike in late September. So the mood is definitely festive here, but a lot of these people may find that they don't have homes standing anymore.
NPR's Lauren Frayer. The ceasefire agreement aims to end the fighting across the Israeli-Lebanese border that has killed thousands of people. A federal judge has ruled that officials in New York City aren't doing enough to keep the city's jails safe. That decision could lead to a federal takeover, as Samantha Max of member station WNYC reports.
Judge Laura Taylor Swain says city officials have failed to implement a laundry list of court orders meant to improve conditions in city jails. That includes a new use of force policy, better supervision of staff, and more robust protections for young people in custody. Mary Lynn Warless with the Legal Aid Society says the ruling will create a pathway for reform.
There's no question that the culture in the jails has to change. It's harmful to everyone who walks through those doors, the people who work there and the people who live there.
Swain says she's thinking about appointing an outside party to manage the jails. That person would answer to the court, not to elected officials. For NPR News, I'm Samantha Max in New York.
And you're listening to NPR. Here in Los Angeles, U.S. Customs and Border agents have seized more than 3,000 fake Gibson guitars. NPR's Chloe Veltman says they were likely destined for sale through e-commerce.
Authorities recently intercepted the suspected cargo arriving in ocean containers from Asia in what authorities are calling the largest counterfeit musical instrument seizure on record in the Los Angeles area. Gibson estimates the guitars would be worth nearly $19 million if they were the real thing. Beth Height is Gibson's chief marketing officer.
We're an American-made product with high standard of excellence. And these actions not only hurt the consumers, they also can lead to and help fund other crime and hurt American jobs and American craftsmen.
An investigation involving U.S. Customs and Border Protection, Homeland Security and the LA County Sheriff's Department is ongoing. Chloe Veltman, NPR News.
Also, here in Southern California, Democrat Derek Tran has defeated two-term Republican Representative Michelle Steele in a specially drawn House seat to give Asian Americans a stronger voice on Capitol Hill. Steele held an early edge after Election Day, but late counted ballots pushed Tran over the top. This race was one of the last to be decided this year, with Republicans gaining a majority in both the House and Senate on Capitol Hill. Stocks finished lower to end a holiday-shortened trading week. This is NPR.
Life coming at you fast? Many times, there's not enough hours in the day to follow all of Houston's news. When you find yourself too busy to stay informed, we have 2 words for you. Hello, Houston. A daily newsletter delivered right to your inbox from Houston Public Media. Every morning, we bring you a quick recap of the previous day and a look ahead at the current day's news. Sign up today at houstonpublicmedia.org/Hello Houston.
After years of supersizing everything, there is a push for restaurants and food manufacturers to dial back portion sizes.
If you surprise consumers out of the blue, they tend to recoil. But if you kind of nurture them into it, they'll go along with it. I mean, people know they need to eat less.
Trimming portion sizes for the good of people and the planet. That's next time on Think.
Tonight at 10 o'clock here on News 88.7.
Reroute. I'm Noelle King with Vox's Rachel Cohen. Rachel covers some of the most fraught topics in America: abortion, childcare, housing. Then earlier this year, she wrote a more personal essay that got a very big response. It was about how she changed her mind about volunteering. Rachel had grown to think it was kind of a useless thing to do. And then she came around in a big way.
Well, when I was growing up, I did volunteer. You know, I have these clear memories of bagging food at food pantries, of cleaning up parks. I actually asked my mom about this recently. Okay, Mom, fact check me. What do you remember of me volunteering growing up?
Well, Rach, I don't remember your volunteering to do too much around the house, but outside the house, you did a lot. You tutored. You visited seniors in assisted living facilities. You did park cleanup.
Okay, sort of a savage burn by your mother, but you were like a little volunteer.
Yeah, and then I went to college in 2010, and that was this time when all these critiques of individual action were just becoming really prominent, both on campus and in society. It was the era of Occupy Wall Street.
Wall Street, Wall Street, Occupy Wall Street!
Systemic change, Bernie Sanders.
We're going to create an economy that works for all of us, not just the 1%.
And I was reading writers like Naomi Klein who were saying that climate change just wasn't going to get solved by whether you recycled enough. And I really believed it.
You can't do anything as an individual. And in fact, that very idea that we as atomized individuals, even groups of atomized individuals, could play a significant part in stabilizing the planet's climate system is objectively nuts.
And it wasn't just that I felt doing the little stuff wasn't going to be helpful, but it was that actually it might be harmful, and that donating to charity or volunteering your time with these smaller things, changing your diet, or, you know, focusing on your shopping bag material, like that was a real distraction from the important work that we needed to be doing to upend the system and change things. And I think we saw also after 2020, there was this really big, you know, national focus on systemic change and structural problems, and all of this, I think, really compounded to having people just become more skeptical, cynical, doubtful about the value of volunteering.
Was it just you that stopped volunteering when you were hearing those messages?
No, and I mean, if you think about who really resonated with the Bernie Sanders campaign and a lot of these ideas and climate activism, it was young people. It was my generation, and it's continued to follow with Gen Z. Volunteering is complicated to study, but we know it's been falling off, even with the rise of all of these virtual opportunities that really exploded in the pandemic. just as one stat, just 20% of Gen Z volunteered per AmeriCorps data compared to almost 30% of Gen X. And there's actually this newish group called the Generosity Commission that formed a few years ago.
The Giving Institute launched the Generosity Commission in 2021 to understand what generosity looks like today and how to respond to declines in giving to and volunteering with nonprofits.
Jane Wales, the Vice President of Philanthropy and Society at the Aspen Institute, she served as the co-chair of this commission.
For most of my life, I've been either running a nonprofit, serving in government, or volunteering myself.
She's in her 70s. She's had a long career. Is a very polished and accomplished woman. Lives in San Francisco. Has a little yappy dog.
There goes the dog again.
She spent many years working primarily with rich people, trying to get them to give more money. And she says that rich people today are not really the real problem.
I think that the moment of sudden concern was when we learned that year over year, with a few exceptions, there's more money given in our society, but by fewer givers. And year over year, with rare exception, more volunteer hours have been donated by fewer volunteers.
Okay, so rich people are not the problem. I never said they were. You never said they were. What is the problem? What does Jane say?
Well, Jane's group with this Generosity Commission, they told me that their research suggests that the decline in volunteering and, charitable giving, that it's all downstream of other themes that we have sort of heard about, rising social isolation, church attendance is down, less trust in institutions, we're all bowling alone.
One of the things that's worried us is we conducted focus groups with everyday givers, everyday volunteers, and several of them said, look, the problems are too large for me to make a difference. Or, I'm not Bill Gates, I can't possibly make a difference. It's important to feel you can make a difference in a democracy so that you do play your role of civic engagement. We're depending on each other to be involved.
All right, so Jane is speaking directly to someone like you, someone who said it isn't worth it. What made you change your mind?
Well, I got that reader question about a year ago, and it made me think, am I making the world a better place by not doing this stuff? Am I happier by not doing this stuff? I'm busy, but I'm not that busy. I always find time for fitness classes and traveling and seeing my friends and popular TV shows. I just hadn't been carving out much time or any time for serving others. It's this strange feeling to feel busy. We're always running around with errands and juggling work and social gatherings, but at the same time kind of disconnected from our local community. And so I started thinking about this loneliness recession we're always talking about.
The U.S. Surgeon General today declared a new public health epidemic in America, loneliness.
And I work from home most of the time, and I know, federal data shows Americans spend more time alone at home than they did 20 years ago. So all of this just led me to do some hard thinking about my life and my own schedule, and I was like, I need to make some kind of change.
Okay, so what'd you do?
Well, I didn't really know what to do. But I was like, I'm going to start with a New Year's resolution. So at the start of 2024, I just set a New Year's resolution to volunteer.
And how did that go?
Well, it was also a little harder than I expected. I'm not really religious. I didn't have a faith institution to plug easily into. Vox doesn't facilitate this sort of thing. We don't have corporate volunteering events on the weekend to go to. I sent out some emails of inquiry on sites like volunteermatch.org, but I didn't hear anything back. So I was kind of at a loss for a while, and eventually I stumbled on a couple of groups, including one called We Are Family in DC. It's this nonprofit that's been around for 20 years. They deliver groceries once a month to low-income seniors. Hi, Mr. Diaz.
Hey, how are you?
How are you? I've been out with them a few times now. The people are really sweet. Have your produce?
Thank you.
Yeah. How are you doing?
I'm fine. How are you?
Good.
I hope, that's next month.
What?
I was going to say, I hope you have a good holiday.
Oh, you too.
I'm anticipating myself.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, you too. I'll see you next month.
You as well.
I like that, Rachel. I like that a lot.
Me too. It was really nice. He's really nice, and they all are just, not everyone wants to talk, for a while, but many of them do, and many of them seem, it's nice to see people come and show care.
Yeah.
That's kind of the idea behind it.
Yeah, tell me about this group.
The group was co-founded by this guy, Mack Anthem. He directs it now, but he originally started out as a volunteer.
Everybody, unless it says produce only, which means they just get produce, everybody gets a plastic bag of non-perishables.
I asked Mark after the last time I went what he's learned about recruiting and retaining volunteers, since for so many other groups, it seems like it's gotten harder than it used to be. But We Our Family has kind of been able to buck the trend, and they really do seem to continue to be able to engage loyal volunteers.
Essentially, if volunteers have a meaningful experience, and for us, we would ideally prefer that it would be a transformative experience, that they, at the end of it, they look at the world in a different way and they feel part of it in a different way, then they tend to come back.
And I mean, the experience has been meaningful to me, and I've been coming back. I've definitely caught some sort of charitable bug through this. I have donated blood 3 times this year after having never donated before, and I recently accepted an invitation to join a local nonprofit board, which I'm really excited about as kind of a new way to get involved. So yeah, it's been a really positive shift, and I feel better prioritizing these things and actually making time for them.
I'm very happy for you. It sounds like you changed your own life for the better. I want to ask you about something that you said earlier, which was when you were in college, you got the sense that volunteering really didn't mean anything in a larger sense. Is volunteering just a form of you taking care of yourself, or do you feel like the volunteering you're doing actually does have a larger purpose?
I think one of the ways that I've come to think about this question is I just don't think we're actually better off when people withhold their time and their generosity. It's not an either or. It's definitely not about giving up political work or collective change. But I think for me, I think I was wrong. I think we've been wrong in concluding that those smaller acts of service were really this stealthy impediment to the broader world we want to build. And I think actually they go together, and demonizing individual action as inconsequential or harmful was a mistake. These things do matter. I'm not solving our blood shortage, but it means someone who needs it can get help that week. Overall, I think it helps to not look at volunteering as something where you need to find that absolutely perfect activity that fulfills all your virtuous desires and perfectly utilizes all your skills. And maybe you won't even really like the first thing you do, but maybe through that you discover something else that you really do find meaningful. And I mean, contrary to what Mack Anthem said earlier about how it has to be transformative, I think there's value in just doing something in that, broad world of service, care, and volunteering. And yeah, I think that's absolutely worth your time.
Rachel Cohen, thanks so much for volunteering to take the time for us today.
Thank you so much.
Today Explained is supported by Progressive Insurance. Progressive's rate comparison tool can be used to find a competitive rate on car insurance for coverage on the road. Options to fit most any budget. More at Progressive.com or 1-800-PROGRESSIVE. Today Explained is supported by BetterHelp, committed to supporting mental health through therapy. Clients are matched with one of 35,000 therapists and can communicate via video, chat, or phone at BetterHelp.com/public.
I'm Natalie Weber with Houston Public Media's Fort Bend County Bureau. One of the most interesting stories that I've gotten to cover here in Fort Bend County is the history of its Black Cowboys. I spoke to the owner of the Black Cowboy Museum in Rosenberg. I spoke to descendants of Black Cowboys whose fathers, grandfathers worked on the George Ranch, and it was really fun, and I think that makes it a really interesting place to cover.
Support for Houston Public Media comes from the Whole Earth Provision Company, offering gift ideas for family and friends, from toys, clothing, footwear, and gear. Family-owned and Texas-based since 1970. Details at wholeearthprovision.com.
Support comes from the Houston Symphony, welcoming pianist Yefim Bronfman for Beethoven's Piano Concerto No. 5, The Emperor. Plus, the orchestra performs Schubert's Unfinished Symphony, November 29th through December 1st. Tickets at HoustonSymphony.org.
This is a day. This is a day. You're listening to today's
explain.
I'm Robert D. Putnam, but nobody calls me Robert. Nobody who knows me calls me Robert. They call me Bob. And I am a retired professor at Harvard University, and I write books.
25 years ago, Bob wrote a book called Bowling Alone. It was grounded in data, and it offered a simple premise. Once upon a time, Americans joined bowling leagues. Now, they're going bowling by themselves. He extended the metaphor, positing that our declining social connections were leading to a decline in our democratic society. Lonely Americans, he wrote, are not great for America. The book was a strike. It's still influential today. Bob Putnam is nothing if not game, and so we asked him to read Rachel's essay and to give us his thoughts.
I rejoice in millennials volunteering one-on-one for many reasons. It's good for the people they're helping, but it's also good for them. There's a lot of evidence that if you're volunteering to help somebody else, you're probably getting more benefits out of it than they do, because there are all sorts of, even physiological changes, but certainly people, after you volunteered, you're happier than if you hadn't volunteered. And probably also the person you're helping is better off.
Rachel essentially is writing, and you've just said the same thing. Volunteering is good for the person who is doing the volunteering, right?
Correct.
Is that the reason to volunteer?
It's one reason to volunteer. You don't have to choose between the reasons, but it's good for you and it's good for, those around you. In writing the book Bowling Alone, I talked about a lot of the consequences of our connections with other people, both our actual in-person connections and our connections through, political organizations or whatever. And that is a community in which people are more connected with one another. The whole community functions better, not just the two people involved in a given exchange, but let me give an example from education. If I, as a parent, get involved in my child's school, I join the PTA or I volunteer in the classroom or whatever, that turns out to be good for my child. But the astonishing thing is, my getting involved has even more effect on the success and the happiness and so on of other kids in the school, even the kids I don't actually see. That's this external effect, if I can put it that way. And in some sense, that's the big picture of Bowling Alone, and it's why I don't want to claim that I'm a prophet, but in the book Bowling Alone, which was written almost 30 years ago, 25 to 30 years ago, I talked about the decline in these connections, decline in what I called social capital. And I said, gosh, if this continues, it's going to be bad for American democracy. We're going to have more polarized politics and so on. That was 30 years ago. And the reason that there's now a little bit of a new wave of interest in my work is that I turned out to be right. Even more right than I thought. If you've not noticed, American politics is in a pickle right now. And the fundamental reason for that is because for the last 30 or 40 years, we as a country have become less and less connected with one another. In my jargon, less and less social capital. Does that make sense?
It does make sense. Does the data bear it out? Because it feels like we're more isolated now. It definitely does. And it felt that way when you wrote Bowling Alone 25 years ago. Is it true?
Yes. Once upon a time, there was a debate, probably now, 25 years ago, there was a thought that maybe, we don't actually have to be in somebody's presence. We could, see them on Zoom, or, that social media would be just as good as actual social connections. For quite a while, the evidence has been that Facebook is not as good as bowling leagues. That is, you don't get the same benefit from connecting with people via social media as you do from actually connecting with them face-to-face. That's what the evidence has shown. I can tell you when public opinion on that changed, and it was just about November 25th of 2020, at the height of the pandemic. And everybody in America realized that hugging grandma was not the same thing as actually seeing grandma over Zoom. And it isn't.
Okay, so at the moment, we're at a low point for social connection. What brought us here?
in the beginning of the 20th century, around about 1900, America was very polarized politically. Our politics were tribal. We were very unequal. It was economically big gap between the rich who were living on the Upper East Side of New York and the huddled masses, poor immigrants on the Lower East Side of Manhattan. Big gaps between rich and poor. We were very socially disconnected. And actually also, although I don't want to focus on this too much, it's a true fact, we were culturally very, very much self-centered. We were a kind of an I society rather than a we society. We didn't think of ourselves as having a lot in common. And then, beginning about 1910, none of these things are super exact, but about 1910, all of those things began to change, and they moved in a different, better direction for a half century and more. So from roughly 1910 to roughly 1965 or 1970, every year we became less polarized politically, less socially isolated, less unequal or more equal, and more of a sense of a we society. So we went from being an I society around 1900 to being a we society around, roughly speaking, 1965. And the movements of the 1960s, which you referred to, but no doubt you don't remember, I do remember that period, that was the culmination of a half-century-long increase in political participation, increase in connecting with other people, increase in cooperation across party lines, increase in equality. And then, and I have to say this is just about the time when I personally began to vote, so you may think I personally brought these problems on America. In the middle 60s, all those lines turned. And for the next half century, up to now, every year we got more socially isolated, more politically disconnected, more unequal. We lost it all.
At some point in her life, Rachel stopped volunteering. Many people have done the same. I am one of those people, incidentally. But when she started volunteering again, she found that it really helped her. If the idea is we do have to get people back to volunteering for the sake of society,
yes,
could it work to sell joining clubs, volunteering, in-person engagement as this will make you feel good? I promise. And the side effect is that it's good for society. It's good for democracy. But if you're going to do it for yourself. Think of it as a kind of self-care.
The danger to your life expectancy from social isolation is as big a risk factor for premature death as smoking.
Huh.
Now, you probably don't smoke, but if you did smoke and you had a choice, should I cut smoking or should I join a club? By all means, join the club.
Turn right.
There are huge personal benefits from connecting with other people, including joining. So the reason that you or Rachel or anybody else, the most important reason actually that you should connect with other people, you will add years to your life expectancy.
You're going to live longer, and also you're going to save American society.
By the way, you're also going to save American democracy. That's right.
Robert Putnam. You won't find him bowling alone. Miles Bryan knew that you needed something good in 2025. He produced today's show. Matthew Collette edited, Laura Bullard fact-checked, and Patrick Boyd engineered. The rest of our team includes Avishai Artsy, Halima Shah, Peter Balanan-Rosen, Hadi Muagdi, Victoria Chamberlain, Andrea Christensdottir, and Rob Byers. Amina El-Sadi is a supervising editor. Miranda Kennedy is our executive producer, and we use music by Breakmaster Cylinder. Are you thankful for Sean Ramos' firm this holiday season? I sure am. Why don't you drop him a 5-star review on Apple and tell him I sent you? We'll be off tomorrow, so you have plenty of time. Today Explained is distributed by WNYC, and the show is a part of Vox.
Today Explained is supported by Project Innerspace, an independent nonpartisan organization working with climate-conscious donors to pursue a cleaner, sustainable future by bringing geothermal energy into the mainstream. More info at projectinnerspace.org.
On this week's Wait, the world's most accomplished blind mountain climber, Eric Weimeyer, talks about the challenges of conquering Everest.
Khumbu Icefall is right out of base camp on Everest, and it's a blind person's worst nightmare. It doesn't meet Americans with Disability Act standards. I'm
Peter Sakel. Join us for an easy downhill to end your week with climbers, weightlifters, and the best thing that ever happened, the gum wrappers. That's Wait, Don't Tell Me from NPR.
Saturday and Sunday mornings at 10 o'clock here on News 88.7.
The Macy's Thanksgiving Day Parade takes place once a year, and it takes a whole year to put it together.
It does sometimes feel like when I come to work that I'm going to an amusement park.
We visit a workshop where artists and engineers create the floats and balloons. That's on the next morning edition from NPR News.
Go straight on.
Tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock here on News 88.7. Fresh Air is next here on Houston Public Media. We make fresh air available to our entire community because we want everyone to be informed. There's going to be isolated showers tonight, increasing clouds with a low around 59 degrees. The chance of rain is 20%. Tomorrow, Thanksgiving Day, partly sunny with a high near 64 degrees. Thursday night, partly cloudy with a low around 47. Friday, mostly sunny with a high near 61 degrees. Friday night, mostly cloudy with a low around 45. This is your NPR station, KUHF Houston News 88.7, a service of the University of Houston.
From WHYY in Philadelphia, I'm Terry Gross with Fresh Air. Today, the lyricist behind many of the most enduring songs in the Great American Songbook. Songs like Fascinating Rhythm, I Got Rhythm, So Wonderful, Embraceable You, Love Is Here to Stay, Let's Call the Whole Thing Off, They Can't Take That Away From Me, and But Not For Me. We talked with Michael Owen, author of the new book, Ira Gershwin, A Life in Words. Owen was the archivist for the Ira and Leonore Gershwin Trust and is now a consultant to the Trust. We'll hear plenty of great Gershwin music. Later, jazz historian Kevin Whitehead remembers drummer Roy Haynes. He played with Lester Young, Miles Davis, Charlie Parker, Bud Powell, Stan Getz, and Sarah Vaughan before he turned 30. Haynes died earlier this month at the age of 99. First News.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Jack Spear. A federal appeals court has handed the state of Texas a big win in its fight with the Biden administration over immigration enforcement. NPR's Sergio Martinez Beltran reports.
A divided Fifth Circuit Court of Appeals ruled that Texas can continue to put razor wire on the U.S.-Mexico border, and federal agents are barred from destroying it. The ruling overturns a prior federal court decision. Texas Governor Greg Abbott celebrated the ruling on X. He says his state will continue adding razor wire to prevent unauthorized migrants from entering the country. This case is one of a few making its way through the courts in a fight between Texas and the Biden administration over immigration enforcement, a role that is supposed to fall under federal authority. Sergio Martinez Beltran, NPR News, Austin.
Thousands of Lebanese refugees displaced by the ongoing war with Israel are returning home as a ceasefire takes hold there. If it does hold, the ceasefire for the time being will bring nearly 14 months of fighting between the two sides to an end. The fighting had been between Iran-backed Hezbollah and U.S. ally Israel, but it threatened a wider conflict. Meanwhile, while Israeli bombs over Lebanon have stopped for now, Israeli airstrikes on Gaza continue. NPR's Ayat Bachari reports the war with Hamas is now in its 14th month with no end in sight.
That's the sound of civil defense rescuers pulling several children out alive from under the rubble of a home in Gaza City, bombed by an Israeli fighter jet overnight. Other videos show the bodies of 3 boys killed in that airstrike lying on the floor of a hospital morgue, disfigured and bloodied. Civil defense say 7 people were killed in that airstrike in Gaza City, an area cut off from the rest of the Strip. Israel did not comment on that airstrike. Separately, the military says it targeted a school in Gaza City where a senior Hamas militant was operating. Civil defense say 9 people were killed, including 6 women and children. The military struck that school in August In an attack, Palestinians say killed at least 80 displaced people. Aya Batrawi, NPR News.
Prices at the consumer level took another bump up last month in just the latest sign that what has been a slow and steady decline in inflation appears to have stalled somewhat. According to the Federal Reserve's preferred inflation gauge, consumer prices rose 2.3% in October compared to the same period a year ago, up from September's rise, where that target is only modestly higher than the Fed's 2% target. Meanwhile, based on the government's latest estimate, the U.S. economy expanded at a healthy 2.8% annual rate for the first 3 months ending in September. Latest assessment of third quarter growth remained unchanged from the initial estimate by the Commerce Department. Losses by some big tech companies, including NVIDIA, Microsoft, and Broadcom, helped pull the overall markets down today. The Dow fell 138 points. The NASDAQ was down 115 points. You're listening to NPR.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Skoll Foundation, dedicated to powering social innovators to transform the world. Learn more at skoll.org. And the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation at rwjf.org.
This is Asian View from NHK World Japan. I'm Keiko Kitagawa. Supporters of Pakistan's imprisoned former Prime Minister have clashed with security forces in Islamabad. At least 4 security personnel have been killed and dozens of people injured. Thousands of members of Imran Khan's political party and his supporters have been marching toward the capital since Sunday with the aim of seeking his release. Khan was ousted from power in 2022. He was later found guilty of corruption and other charges. Khan and his party have denied them all. The head of Japan's biggest business lobby says Donald Trump's tariff plan could have a huge impact on Japanese companies with production bases in Mexico and Canada. Japan Business Federation chairperson Tokura Masakazu explains the group's stance.
We hope that the U.S. will exert its leadership to support a free and open economic order based on international rules.
Japan's foreign ministry says there are about 2,500 overseas offices and affiliates of Japanese companies in Mexico and Canada as of October last year. A Chinese citizen journalist who was imprisoned during the early days of the coronavirus pandemic has been arrested again. Former lawyer Zhan Zhan posted information online in 2020 about citizens forced to live in harsh conditions in Wuhan. The first cases of COVID-19 were reported in the central Chinese city. She was arrested and imprisoned for disrupting public order. Zhang was released in May. A website that supports human rights activities in China says Zhang was arrested again on November 18th. We are broadcasting from NHK in Tokyo.
Houston Public Media is a service of the University of Houston and is supported with your gifts to the Houston Public Media Foundation. More information available online at houstonpublicmedia.org/donate.
This is Fresh Air. I'm Terry Gross. The classic songs Lady Be Good, Embraceable You, Swonderful, Love Is Here to Stay, Let's Call the Whole Thing Off, Fascinating Rhythm, I Got Rhythm, I've Got a Crush on You, My Ship, The Man That Got Away, Long Ago and Far Away, I could go on. They all have lyrics by Ira Gershwin. Most of his best-known songs were written with his younger brother, the pianist and composer George Gershwin, but Ira also wrote with Harold Arlen, Jerome Kern, and Kurt Weill. My guest, Michael Owen, is the author of the new book, Ira Gershwin, A Life in Words. Owen was the archivist for the Ira and Leonard Gershwin Trusts until those papers were given to the Library of Congress. Owen now works with the Trust as a consulting archivist and historian. He's also the author of a book about the singer Julie London. Let's start with Ella Fitzgerald singing Lady Be Good from her 1959 album, Ella Fitzgerald Sings the George and Ira Gershwin Songbook. It's the title song from an early Gershwin musical.
Oh, sweet and lovely, lady be good. Oh, lady be good to me. I
Michael Owen, welcome to Fresh Air. I love the Gershwin's music, so it's a pleasure to be able to talk with you about it. I opened with Lady Be Good because I think it ties together the early part of Ira Gershwin's career with the part in the 1950s when he wasn't really writing much, and his career, his songs, like, needed a boost, and Ella Fitzgerald's Gershwin songbook really helped give him that. So can you talk a little bit about the importance of both of those, and, you know, the Lady Be Good musical and the Ella Fitzgerald Gershwin songbook?
Thank you, first off, for having me on. 1924 was absolutely a big year for Ira and George. It brought them together for the first time as a songwriting team to write a Broadway show. And because Lady Be Good was such a success, it fostered the rest of their career together. But by the time the late 1950s came around, when Ella Fitzgerald recorded the songbook, Ira's career had come to an end. He might not have known that at the time, but it did. We know that now. And the songbook, one of the series of songbooks that Ella Fitzgerald did of other songwriters of the period, brought a new light, a new focus on the songs that the brothers wrote. And so it was a commercial success. It was an artistic success.
Go straight
and
on.
It brought on a wealth of new recordings of those songs and others in the catalog, and helped Ira financially quite well.
George and Ira had very different interests and personalities. George was more extroverted. Ira was more like shy, or wanted to stay more in the background. And, you know, George was very musical. Ira was immersed in words. He read a lot. He kept a record of what he read. He started writing light verse that was published in the college magazine or newspaper and other places. Were they close as children, being so different from each other?
They were only 2 years apart, and they were the first and second children of Morris and Rose Gershwin. So they grew up together, even though their interests were very separate. George was somebody who went out and got into fights and came home with a black eye. Ira was back in his room reading newspaper articles and magazines and books. So, you know, his life became more one of observation rather than activity, whereas George's life would have been a 180-degree difference from that.
When Ira was young, either in high school or college, he became friends with Yip Harburg, the lyricist probably most famous for writing the lyrics for The Wizard of Oz. And he also wrote the very famous lyric, "Brother, Can You Spare a Dime?" And not only were they friends, and they often, like, talked about not only poetry and light verse, but also lyrics together, Ira actually contributed a couple of lines to Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz. What was Ira's contribution?
Well, all three of the writers who were friends, Harold Arlen, the composer, and Yip Harburg and Ira, who had been classmates and writing partners together before, when Arlen and Harburg had been hired to write the score at MGM for The Wizard of Oz, they played the tune, Arlen's tune that became Over the Rainbow, for Ira because he was a sounding board. And I must say that was the way it was with all these writers of that period. They were all generally friendly to each other. I don't think there was a lot of competition. I mean, there was competition, obviously, but there wasn't angry competition. So when the song was finished, or at least when Harburg and Arlen thought the song was finished, they came over to Ira's house, and Arlen sat down at the piano and played the tune, and Harburg sang the song. Ira liked it a lot, but he felt like that there was something missing at the end, a coda to the song. And so Ira was the one who came up with the line about bluebirds flying at the end, which is one of the more famous lines from the song. But
if happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why oh why can't I?
Right, and I think that sums up the song in many ways. It sums up the film. It sums up Dorothy's journey. But I think he just was helping out his friends, and whether he got credit for that or not, that didn't really make that much difference to him.
And he did not get credit as a...
And he did not get credit, no.
Why don't we just hear that coda? Just hear the end of the song.
If happy little bluebirds fly beyond the rainbow, why, oh, why can't
That was the end of Somewhere Over the Rainbow from The Wizard of Oz, and we heard those last couple of lines, which were actually written by Ira Gershwin. Ira read so many books and, wrote light verse, and some of the lyrics have really funny literary references in them. And an example for that is But Not For Me, which is a beautiful song. And it has the line, I found more skies of gray than any Russian play can guarantee. One of his famous lines. Can you talk a little bit about that song and how it originated?
Well, But Not For Me was one of the songs that was written for the 1930 musical Girl Crazy, which featured a very young Ginger Rogers. That was a song that Ginger Rogers sang in the show, a ballad that she sang, and it was also the show that brought Ethel Merman to everybody's attention. So I Got Rhythm is in the same show. And it was perhaps the height of the Gershwin's silly shows by 1930, before they went into some of the political shows of a few years after, and then Porgy and Bess. But Not For Me it's a very romantic ballad, and you can take it that way. But if you listen to the lyrics closely, you can hear both Ira's influences, because, as you say, he read a lot and he had a huge library, but also his tricky rhymes about wedding knots and being that was not for me.
Part of the lyric, and it's the end of the lyric, goes, when every happy plot ends with a marriage knot, and there's no knot for me. So it's a clever play on words.
Absolutely correct. And I think that one of the things that Ira complained about sometimes was that in a theater, most people were never going to get that sense of the song. They were going to hear the two words and the two sounds, not and not, and they'd think they were the same thing. And it was only the people who actually studied the sheet music or who sang the song professionally who might pick it up. But he did this on purpose.
Why?
Because he always wanted to have some fun with the lyrics. I don't think he ever thought of lyric writing, particularly in his early years, as a job so much as it was his way of making his thoughts about love and art known to the world of musical theater and film music and popular songs. And whether people got that or not, that certainly wasn't up to him. But he was very protective of his lyrics, and when singers would sing songs and not in the way that he wrote them, singing I've got rhythm instead of I got rhythm, he was somewhat offended by that in a humorous way.
He was the same with It's Wonderful. If somebody sang It's Wonderful, he'd get pretty upset. And I was listening to the Lee Wiley. She did a whole set of Gershwin songs, and she sings It's Wonderful as opposed to Swanderful. But she's such a great singer. Anyhow, let's not get too distracted and let's hear But Not For Me. Should we hear Lee Wiley singing it?
Absolutely, let's hear Lee Wiley.
And this is on her recording from the 1930s, right?
Yes, Lee Wiley she's generally a forgotten name in the world of popular song these days, but she was one of the first performers to do what we now call songbook albums.
So let's hear Lee Weiler's recording from the 1930s of George and Ira Gershwin's But Not For Me.
They're writing songs of love, but not for me. The lucky stars above, but not for me. With love to lead the way, I've found more clouds of gray than any Russian play could guarantee. I was a fool to fall and get that way. I owe alas and all, oh, lack a day.
Time to hit the road.
Although I can't dismiss the memory of your kiss, I guess he's not for me.
That was Lee Wiley, recorded in the 1930s, singing the Gershwin song, But Not For Me. My guest, Michael Owen, is the author of a new book called Ira Gershwin, A Life in Words. Let's take a short break here, and then we'll talk some more. This is Fresh Air.
This is News 88.7.
It turns out wild turkeys are really intelligent, and they're born with an incredible genetic blueprint of their natural world.
They understood, almost without exception, every plant and every animal. They knew if it was edible, they knew if it was dangerous, and the specificity of that knowledge was stunning.
I'm Sarah McConnell. This week on With Good Reason, all about the turkey.
Thanksgiving Day at 9 a.m. on News 88.7.